Every Closing Time by Eressa. Chapter 1. The hour after last call. The last couple left at midnight, which was early for a Friday, though Dell had learned years ago not to read meaning into the hours people chose to go home. The woman had laughed too loud at something near the end, the particular bright laughter of someone who had drunk enough to stop performing and had not yet realized the performance was the point. Her companion had thanked Dell twice at the door. Dell had smiled both times with the same warmth and seen them out into the cold of roof rocket, and then she had closed the door and stood for a moment with her hand still on the latch, listening to the night swallow the sound of their footsteps. November in Paris did not so much arrive as accumulate. By the time you understood it was cold, it had been cold for weeks. She turned back to the room. The supper club occupied the ground floor and cellar of a narrow building on the north slope of Montmartre, the kind of building that had been many things before it was hers. A grocer, a seamstress's workshop, briefly a storage space for a printer who had since moved 2 streets over and still waved when he passed. Dell had taken the lease 4 years ago with the specific intention of making it into something that did not yet exist in this particular configuration, a place where the music was good and the food was better and the company, after midnight, was composed entirely of people who had grown tired of apologizing for what they were. It had taken 14 months to become that thing, and another 6 before it was reliably full on the nights that mattered, and now it simply was, the way a thing is once it has been long enough, whole, certain of itself, not requiring explanation. The room after closing had a quality Dell had never been able to describe to anyone who hadn't experienced it. It was not quiet, exactly. Clem was still at the piano, working through something slow and unresolved that was either a composition or an argument with the instrument. It was difficult to say which. There was the particular smell of a room that had held people, tobacco smoke settling into the curtains, the ghost of garlic and butter from the kitchen, champagne warming in the glasses that hadn't yet been cleared. The candles were burning low, the wax soft and pooling, and the light they made was the color of old amber, the color of things seen through time. Dell wiped the bar. She did this every night, and she did it with the attention of someone who found the repetition meaningful rather than tedious. The bar was mahogany she had sourced from a salvage yard in the 11th arrondissement on the recommendation of a man she'd never quite trusted but who had impeccable taste in reclaimed wood. She kept it oiled. It was the thing in the room she was most certain of. "Last one," Clem said, without looking up from the keys. "Take your time." Clem did not hurry. They played through the phrase again, slower, then let it resolve into something that might have been an ending or might have been a pause. It was also difficult to know, with Clem, where the music stopped and the thinking began. Clem Ardoin had come to Paris from New Orleans 2 years before Dell opened the club and had played in 4 other establishments before Dell had heard them through the open window of a bar on Rue Pigalle and walked in and offered them a job on the spot, which was not how Dell typically operated. She had been embarrassed about it afterward. Clem had said only, "What nights?" and that had been that. Dell collected glasses. She moved through the room with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had choreographed this ritual so many times it had become indistinguishable from instinct. Glasses to the kitchen, chairs straightened, the small adjustments that return a room to its neutral state, ready to be inhabited again tomorrow. There was satisfaction in it. There was also, she was aware, something that was not quite satisfaction, something at the edges of the ritual, a quality of the silence that the efficiency was partly designed to fill. She did not examine it. At the window, she paused to check the street. A habit, nothing more. She had never had trouble here, had cultivated too carefully the kind of reputation that precluded trouble, but old habits from Chicago died according to their own schedule, and this one had not yet chosen to. The street was empty. The lamp on the corner made a circle of orange light on the wet cobblestones. In it nothing moved. She was turning away when she noticed the mark on her wrist catching the candlelight. It was on the inside of her left wrist, just below the pulse point. Not a tattoo, not precisely a birthmark, something in between, something that occupied the visual register of both, without quite being either. She had had it as long as she could remember, and had spent approximately the same amount of time explaining it to herself. A coincidence of pigment, an unusual concentration of melanin, a thing that happens sometimes. It was the shape of a seal, though she never used that word for it. She used the word mark, or sometimes just that thing on my wrist, in the interior accounting of her own life. In candlelight, it caught the warm frequencies and threw them back slightly differently than the surrounding skin. She had noticed this before. She noticed it again now, and then looked away and finished checking the window latch. "Good night, Clem," she said. "Night." Clem closed the piano with the gentle certainty of someone retiring something that had worked hard and deserved the rest. They pulled on their coat, found their hat on the hook by the kitchen door, and were gone. The particular quiet departure of a person who had perfected the art of leaving without making it an event. Dell stood in the empty room. The candles were very low now. 2 had already guttered. She would need to replace them before tomorrow. She made a mental note and did not write it down because she never needed to. Her memory for the operational details of the club was exact and had never failed her in 4 years. She remembered every order for supplies, every shift, every repair. She could tell you what the till had held on a Thursday in March without checking her ledger. This was useful. It was also, in the way of most useful things, something she had developed in response to an early understanding that forgetting cost more than she could afford. She collected the last of the glasses. She banked the kitchen fire. She counted the till, wrote the figure in the ledger, and locked the ledger in the drawer beneath the bar with a small brass key she wore on a chain at her hip, a habit from the first months when she had not been certain the club would survive, and had kept the accounts close the way you keep close anything that might need defending. The club would survive. It had been surviving for 4 years with increasing confidence. She kept the key anyway. The last candle was the one at the end of the bar. She always left it until the end, no particular reason, a pattern she had fallen into somewhere in year 1, and never revised. She stood at the bar for a moment with the flames still burning and the room in its closing time state. The chairs back, the glasses gone, the tables wiped, the music ended. Hers and orderly, and entirely still. She thought briefly and without content about nothing. Then she pinched out the flame. The dark was complete for a moment before her eyes adjusted. The thin line of streetlight under the front door, the faint blue luminosity that Paris threw up against its own night sky, the gradual return of shapes. The room came back in outline. Bar, tables, chairs, the stairs to the cellar, the door to the kitchen. She knew it by memory, anyway. She could have moved through it blind. She stood there for a moment longer than she needed to.
She was not sure why.
It was not restlessness. She was not a restless person. It was something quieter than that, something that did not have a name she had ever bothered to assign, something that lived at the end of evenings when the room was full of the absence of people who had just been warm and loud and alive in it. She stood in it and let it be what it was. Then she went upstairs to bed. Alone, which was how she always went upstairs, and exactly as she had planned it. Chapter 2, $40 and a borrowed tuxedo. Ruthie Calloway arrived the next morning with coffee she had not asked permission to make, an opinion about the curtains in Dell's kitchen that she delivered before she had fully removed her coat, and the particular expression of someone who had been composing observations since the previous evening and had finally found an audience. "The curtains," she said, "are the wrong yellow." "They're ecru," Dell said. "They're the wrong yellow. You have too much amber in this room already. The candlesticks, the bar, that lamp you're so attached to, you need a cooler tone. Something that says morning instead of last call. This room doesn't need to say morning. This room says last call. It's a supper club. And this is your kitchen." Ruthie sat down at the table with the confidence of a woman who had never entered a room she did not intend to occupy fully. She set 2 cups down and filled them from the pot she had apparently located on her own in Dell's kitchen, in cupboards Dell had not shown her, with a familiarity that would have been presumptuous from anyone else, and was from Ruthie simply the expression of how Ruthie moved through the world. "Sit down, Dell. You've been standing in doorways for 3 years. "I've been standing in doorways for 4 years, Dell said, but she sat. Ruthie Calloway was 34 years old and had come to Paris 3 years after Dell on a plan she described variously as a sabbatical, an adventure, and a temporary arrangement that had simply not found a reason to end. She was from Memphis, Tennessee, and had brought with her the full-throated opinions of a woman who had grown up in a household where silence was considered a form of social failure. She was also, Dell had understood within the first week of knowing her, the kind of friend who arrived in a life and retroactively made the years before her seem sparsely populated. They had met at a party on the Rue de Clichy, introduced by a mutual acquaintance who had subsequently moved to London and been more or less forgotten, and had been eating meals together and arguing about minor matters and knowing each other in the particular way of friends who do not require explanation 3 weeks after that. Dell did not make friends easily or quickly. With Ruthie, she had simply found it had already happened before she noticed she was doing it. "How did Friday go?" Ruthie asked.
"Fine."
Full through 11, thinned out after midnight. The couple at table 4 were celebrating something. Anniversary or engagement, I didn't ask, and ordered 2 bottles of the good champagne, which helped the numbers. "You always tell me how the numbers were." "You asked how it went." "I asked how Friday went, not how the ledger went." Ruthie gave her a look that was warm and pointed in equal measure. "You know what your problem is, Dell. You're going to tell me regardless of what I say. You built yourself a beautiful life with no room in it for wanting anything." Ruthie said it with the ease of someone naming a thing she had observed before, from several angles, and had finally found the right phrasing for. Not a criticism. Or not only a criticism. The kind of thing you said to someone when you were fond of them and frustrated by them in the same motion. You've got the club, you've got the apartment, you've got Clem and the regulars and your little arrangement with that wine merchant on the Rue des Abysses who gives you the good bottles at the not good bottle price. And every single piece of it is yours in the specific way that things are yours when you've made sure nothing requires maintenance from another human being. You know what I mean. Dell drank her coffee. "I'm not going to agree with that," she said. "You don't have to agree with it. It's still true." Ruthie tucked her feet up under herself in the chair in the way that Dell had told her at least 4 times was hard on the joints, and which Ruthie continued to do because she was 34 years old and had not yet had cause to regret it. "Tell me something that isn't about the club." Dell considered. "Margot is threatening to repot the window box again. I'm not sure the street can survive another season of her experimental herb choices."
Dell.
The wine merchant asked if I was going to the Beaumont show at the gallery next week. He thought we might be related. "Because of the name?" "Because of the name." I told him my family was from Chicago. He seemed disappointed. Ruthie watched her the way she sometimes watched her, with the patience of a woman who had decided to wait for something and was willing to hold the space for it. It was one of the things Dell found both comfortable and occasionally unnerving about her. Ruthie did not require you to fill silences she had deliberately left open. She just let them sit there, full of implication, until you either walked into them or found a way around. Dell found a way around. "What's happening with Etienne?" she asked. This was reliable. Ruthie's complicated pianist, Etienne Moreau, who had been married when they met and was now technically unmarried in the way of a man who had signed the legal documents but not yet located his emotional luggage, occupied enough conversational territory that a well-placed question could sustain an entire meal. It was not that Dell was incurious about Ruthie's life. It was that Dell was practical about the uses of narrative. Ruthie accepted the subject change with the grace of a woman who knew exactly what was happening and chose to be generous about it. She talked about Etienne. Dell listened with genuine attention. Ruthie's life was, objectively, more eventful than hers in every register that did not involve running a business, and refilled both cups when they ran low, and did not once think about the seal on her wrist. She thought about it slightly less than she might have expected to, which was itself a kind of noticing. Outside, Margot Foss could be heard on the landing above, doing something with a broom that seemed more personal than practical. Margot was 58 and French in the specific way of Parisians who had seen the city change so many times they had become their own archive of it. She held the building's history the way old buildings hold water, thoroughly and without effort. She had been Dell's neighbor since the first week and had arrived at that first week with an opinion about the kitchen ventilation that turned out to be correct, and had not substantially revised her general approach since. Dell had thought, in the early days, that Margot would be difficult. She had proved instead to be useful in ways Dell hadn't anticipated, a source of information about the neighborhood, the city, the particular archaeology of this block, and Dell had learned to value that kind of utility in a person even when it came attached to opinions about curtains. "She likes you," Ruthie said, following the sound. She likes having someone to tell things to. That's the same thing, mostly. Dell conceded this with a small movement of her head that was not quite a nod. The morning settled around them. The particular quality of November light in Paris, which was less light than a kind of luminous gray, diffuse and full and strangely intimate. Dell had grown up with Chicago winter, which was something entirely different, blunt and democratic, cold that did not care about you personally. Paris cold was personal. It had texture. She had not expected to find this when she came. She had not expected many of the things Paris turned out to be. She had arrived in 1918, 25 years old. With $40 she had spent the previous winter earning through work she did not enjoy, a tuxedo she had borrowed from the son of a neighbor who was approximately her build and had not been home to notice, and the private understanding, not a plan, not a decision, but an understanding, that the life available to her in Chicago had the shape of a thing she could not inhabit. Not the poverty of it, though there was that. Not the work, though there was that too. Something more specific than either. Something that had a name in certain rooms in Paris that it did not have a name for in any room she knew in Chicago. She had told Ruthie the story of the crossing once, lightly, as biography rather than wound. The ship, the cold, the first sight of Le Havre in grey November light not unlike this one, the train to Paris, and the first week in a rented room in the 9th arrondissement where the landlady spoke no English and Dell spoke no French, and they had arrived at a wordless operational understanding that served them both for 3 months. She had told it the way you tell a story you've told enough times that the sharp edges have become smooth, the telling itself a kind of management. She had left out Aunt Vera. Not the fact of her. Ruthie knew about Vera, knew she existed, knew Dell wrote letters north across the Atlantic with the regularity of someone paying a debt. She had left out the particular weight of the conversation at Vera's kitchen table when Dell was 19, the specific quality of Vera's voice when she had said, "You cannot afford this. Not here. Not as a colored woman. Not in this life." She had left out the way that sentence had settled into her and taken up residence and built something inside her that looked, over the years, increasingly like a wall and increasingly like a room she'd grown comfortable in. Ruthie was watching her again. "What?" Dell said. "Nothing. Just watching you think." "I'm not thinking." "You get a particular look when you're not thinking," Ruthie said. "It's the look of someone who's thinking very precisely about not thinking. It's actually very specific, Dell. I could pick it out in a crowd." Dell picked up her cup. It was empty. She set it back down. "The building has history," she said, which was not what she had been thinking about exactly, but was something she had been aware of lately in the way you become aware of a sound you've been hearing without registering, suddenly present, suddenly specific. She had found herself wondering, in the evenings lately when the club had emptied and she moved through the closing ritual, what the room had been before it was hers. The cellar in particular. There were things in the cellar that had been there when she took the lease. A trunk, some papers, a hat box she had not investigated, an assortment of the kind of objects that accumulate when a life has ended in a room and no one has been sufficiently motivated to clear them. She had not been sufficiently motivated either. It hadn't seemed urgent. She would get to it eventually. "Every building in this city has history," Ruthie said. "That's what this city is. Compressed history, all the way down." "I should ask Margot." "About what, specifically?" "Who lived here before me." Ruthie gave her another of those measured looks, the kind that contained a question she was choosing not to ask directly. Then she uncurled herself from the chair and reached for her coat, which was the gesture that meant she had other places to be and was choosing to save the conversation for a time when Dell might be more forthcoming. "Ask Margot," Ruthie agreed. "You should ask Margot everything she knows about this building. And then you should ask yourself why you've been here for years and never thought to wonder." She kissed Dell's cheek at the door, which she did every time, and was gone down the stairs with the particular energy of a woman who had more appointments than she would admit to. Dell sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the curtains, which were, she now could see, slightly the wrong yellow. She thought, "I have everything I need." She said it in her head the way she always said it, which was the way you recite a thing you are choosing to continue believing. Then she cleared the cups and went downstairs to open the club, and did not think about the cellar, and told herself she would get to it eventually, and the morning continued around her in its ordinary way. Chapter 3. What Clem Hears. Clem Ardoin had a rule, which they had made for themselves at the age of 14 in the back pew of a church in the Treme, and had not substantially revised since. You do not say what you cannot prove, and you do not prove what is better left uncertain. It was a practical rule. It had served them in Louisiana, where certain knowledge was a liability. It served them in Paris, where certain knowledge was a different kind of liability, but a liability nonetheless. It served them in the club, where they had learned early that Dell Beaumont ran a room with the quiet authority of someone who had made all the necessary decisions before you arrived and did not need your input on the ones she hadn't asked about. Clem respected this. They were, themselves, a person who preferred to occupy the same space as a thing rather than announce it. The thing they were currently occupying the same space as had begun in October, which was when they had first noticed the drop in temperature at the far end of the room near closing time. Not the general cold of November coming in. That came later, and came through the door and the windows and the gaps in the old frame that Dell had been meaning to have addressed since year 2. This was specific, localized, the kind of cold that had a shape if you were paying attention, which Clem was. They paid attention to things others didn't because they had learned that this was where the actual information lived. It was a Tuesday in November now, 3 weeks past the initial noticing, and Clem was playing the last number with the kind of attention the late hour required. Not performance, because the room was down to its final guests and the performance had ended when the kitchen closed, but something more considered, the music itself thinking aloud. They played in the minor key they always defaulted to when the mood asked for it, a slow progression that had no name because it had not been finished yet. They had been working on it for 6 weeks. It kept adding bars. The temperature dropped at the far end of the room. Clem's left hand kept the low notes going and did not break rhythm. They had been playing since they were 7 years old and had learned in the accumulated years since that the body knew things the mind was still catching up to, knew it in the hands especially, which continued what they were doing while the rest of you dealt with whatever had just happened. This was useful now. Their hands kept playing. Their attention moved, careful and unhurried, to the far corner. The candles in that corner had a different quality. Not brighter. If anything, more contained, as though the light had decided to stay close to the flame rather than reaching into the room. The shadow near the far wall did not belong to anything Clem could account for. Not the chair, not the table, not the particular angle of the curtains. It was a standing shadow which required a standing thing to make it, and Clem could not identify the standing thing. They did not stop playing. This was important. They did not stop playing, and they did not look directly, because in their experience the moment you looked directly at something that did not want to be seen, it had a way of resolving into nothing, and you were left with an empty corner, and the faint embarrassment of a person who is startled at their own reflection. So they watched the shadow from the side of their attention, the way you watch something on the water at night. Not looking at it, looking near it, letting the peripheral register do the work it was better suited for. The shadow held. It had a shape. Not threatening. Nothing in it communicated threat, which Clem registered with the specific relief of someone who had grown up in a world that had given them good reason to assess threat quickly. What it communicated was something else. Something closer to waiting. The quality of a thing that had been standing in a spot for a long time and had settled into it the way furniture settles, the way a worn path settles into a garden, with the particular authority of long occupation. Clem's piano had a way of responding to the room that was not entirely under their control. They knew this about themselves and had made peace with it. The instrument was an old upright that Dell had sourced from a man in the 18th who claimed it had come from a hotel bar, and whether or not that was true, it had the warm, slightly dark resonance of a piano that had been played in proximity to conversation and smoke for a long time. Clem loved it with the specific love of one working musician for another. Wary and grateful and attentive. The piano, in the presence of the shadow, wanted to play more slowly. Clem let it. The progression they were playing took on a quality it hadn't had before, something more interior, more patient, the kind of music that wasn't trying to go anywhere because it had accepted where it was. The remaining guests at table 2 were too deep in their own conversation to register the shift. Dell was in the kitchen doing the last of the closing work, the familiar sound of her moving efficiently through a space she owned completely. The shadow was still. Clem thought, without knowing why. She. Not it.
She.
The way you sometimes knew a thing before you had any basis for knowing it, the way you could sense the key a song wanted to be in before you'd heard a note of it. The shadow in the corner was a she, and she had been here before, and she was here the way things were here when they had a reason to be. Not accidentally, not wrongly, but with the quiet intention of something that belonged. Clem played until the guests at table 2 finally collected themselves and their coats and left through the front door with the slightly surprised air of people who had stayed longer than they'd planned. Then they played until the door had closed and the room had resettled, and the only sounds were the last guttering candles and Dell coming back from the kitchen. Then they looked up. The far corner was empty. The candles in that corner had a softness they hadn't had earlier. The temperature had returned to what it normally was at this hour. There was nothing near the wall that shouldn't be there. Chairs, the small table Dell kept for walk-ins, the curtain with its slight draft from the window behind. Clem sat with their hands quiet on the keys for a moment. Then they closed the piano, collected their coat and hat with the economy of movement that was simply their nature, and said good night to Dell, who was at the bar, checking the till with the same focused attention she brought to every operational task, and who said good night back without looking up because she was counting, and she never lost count. Clem went out into the November dark. On the walk home, through the back streets of Montmartre, that they had learned the way you learned a neighborhood you intended to stay in, they thought about what they had and had not seen, and arrived at no conclusion because conclusions required proof, and they had none. They had a temperature drop and a shadow, and a piano that wanted to move slower in a particular corner of a room. They had played differently tonight. More inward, more minor, more attentive. As though the music were aware of being listened to by something that understood it. They would play differently next time, too. They already knew this. They would not tell Dell.
Not yet.
Not until there was something to tell that wasn't merely a shape in the peripheral register and a shift in temperature and the unaccountable certainty that the she in the corner was waiting for something that had not yet arrived. The street was quiet. Clem turned up their collar and walked, and the city received them the way it received everyone who moved through it after midnight. Without comment, without welcome, with the ancient indifference of a place that had seen everything and remembered most of it. Above them, in the club, the last candle burned down to its socket. The room held the warmth for a moment. Then it too went quiet. Chapter 4. Dear Vera. She wrote the letter on Sunday, which was the day the club was closed, and she permitted herself the particular luxury of an unhurried morning. Coffee made properly, the newspaper, the window open a crack despite the cold because the room needed air, and she had always preferred to be slightly cold than sealed in. She wrote to Vera every 2 or 3 weeks, which was often enough to maintain the correspondence, and not so often that she ran out of things to say. Or, rather, not so often that the constraint became obvious. She dated the top of the page. November 8th, 1925. Then, Dear Vera, November has arrived in Paris in the way it always does here. Not all at once, but by accumulation, the cold becoming the air rather than merely being in it. I have had the good stove going in the kitchen since last week, and Margot upstairs tells me I should expect the first frost before the month is out, which she delivers as a warning, but which I understand is really just her way of having a conversation about the windows, which she believes I have not adequately sealed. I have sealed them adequately. Margot has a higher standard for adequate than most. The club has been busy. October was the best October since I opened, which I attribute to the addition of a second kitchen night on Thursdays, something I resisted for 2 years on the grounds that it would strain Clem's schedule, and which Clem, when I finally asked, told me they had been waiting for me to suggest since last spring. I have written this down as a lesson about asking rather than assuming, though I'm not sure I'll retain it. Ruthie came by Saturday morning, which means I now know everything happening in the American expatriate community in the 9th and the 18th arrondissements, filtered through Ruthie's extremely particular editorial sensibility. I'm sure you would like her. She is from Memphis, and she has never once let me finish a sentence I started in a direction she disagreed with, which you would recognize as a quality you share. The enclosed. She had not yet written the enclosed. She paused here and considered what she was enclosing, then noted the recipe Margot had given her for the potato dish Vera had asked about in September, which she had been meaning to send since October. The enclosed is the recipe Margot finally wrote down after 3 requests and several editorial revisions. She has translated it into English herself, and I recommend reading the translated version as a document of Margot's relationship with the English language, which is functional and very much her own. I am well. She stopped. She read the last 3 words. She had written them, or some near variation of them, at the close of every letter for 7 years. She had never, in 7 years, stopped to register what she was saying when she said them. I am well. I am happy. I have everything I need. The last line was the one that went in some letters and not others. She alternated, she had noticed, placing it when the absence of it might be conspicuous and leaving it out when its presence might invite a response she wasn't prepared for. She had not consciously tracked this. She had simply been doing it, the way you do things that have been useful long enough that they stop being decisions. She put down the pen. The kitchen was quiet around her. The Sunday quality of the apartment, different from other mornings, slower, the sounds of the street outside more domestic and less hurried, was something she had come to rely on without articulating the reliance. She looked at the letter. She thought about adding another paragraph. There was a funny story about the wine merchant and a misunderstanding involving a saint's day she had not known the significance of, and instead she picked up the pen and wrote the line. I am well. I am happy. I have everything I need. She read it back. She folded the letter. She pressed the fold with the heel of her hand, the way she always did, and slid it into the envelope she had already addressed and stamped, and set it on the corner of the table where she left things that were ready to go out. Then she sat for a moment longer. The kitchen window framed a slice of the courtyard below, the stone, the drain in the center, the bare vine on the far wall that would be green again in April if April cooperated. She had looked at this view for 4 years. She knew the vine's patterns by now, the particular way it moved in wind, the 2 small birds that used the ledge in spring. She had not told anyone about the birds. It was the kind of thing that felt, when she considered saying it, like too much of herself. She thought of Vera's kitchen in Chicago.
Not.
Deliberately. It arrived the way the building's cold arrived, by accumulation, present before she'd noticed it coming. The kitchen table with the oilcloth cover, the window that looked onto the alley, the particular sound of the building in winter, pipes, neighbors, the radiator's unreliable heat. Vera at the table, in the chair that was Vera's chair, with a cup of coffee she nursed through every important conversation because it gave her something to do with her hands. Dell had been 19. It was January, and Chicago had been doing what Chicago did in January, which was inform you in the clearest possible terms that it did not care about your feelings. She had come home from a neighbor's apartment 2 floors up, where a girl named Cora, quick laughing, unserious, entirely uninterested in consequences, had kissed her once, quickly, in the kitchen while the others were in the next room. It had lasted perhaps 4 seconds, and Dell had spent the walk down the stairs understanding, with the specific precision of a thing you already knew but were only now allowing yourself to know, what it meant about her. The neighbor in the hall had seen her coming out. She had not known, at the time, how much the neighbor had seen or understood. Vera had. Vera had sat her down at the table. Not unkindly, not with anger, with the particular gravity of a woman who had been thinking about this conversation for longer than Dell knew, had prepared it the way you prepared for something you were afraid of, and said, "You cannot afford this. Not here. Not as a colored woman. Not in this life." Dell had believed her. She had continued to believe her, because the reasoning was sound, because Vera was right in every way Vera was capable of being right, because the world Vera was describing was real, and the protections it offered were real, and the costs of stepping outside it were real. She had believed it in Chicago, and she had believed it on the ship, and she had believed it in Paris, where the rules were different, but the rules Vera had taught her lived inside her now, not in Chicago, and did not revise themselves simply because the geography had changed. She had always thought, a person who did not require things to be simple in order to accept them. She could accept a true thing and an incomplete thing at the same time. She had done so for 13 years. She looked at the envelope on the corner of the table. She thought, there are things in the cellar I haven't looked at. This was not, on its surface, connected to anything she had just been thinking. It arrived as its own thought, the way certain things arrived, fully formed, with its own weight, requiring nothing to support it. A former tenant, Things left behind. An envelope she had noticed once and declined to open because it hadn't seemed urgent and she would get to it eventually. Eventually had a way of becoming a longer word than you expected when you first used it. She stood up. She moved the coffee cup to the sink. She picked up the letter for Vera from the corner of the table and went downstairs to leave it in the post box at the building's entrance, which she did every Sunday, same time, the way she did all things that required regularity. Without ceremony, without resentment, with the straightforward efficiency of someone who had decided long ago that consistency was a form of freedom and was still in the process of believing it. In the entrance hall, she dropped the envelope through the post slot. She stood there for a moment with her hand still raised, listening to it settle. Then she went back upstairs to her apartment and did not go to the cellar and told herself she would get to it when she had time, and the Sunday continued around her in its ordinary way. Chapter 5. She comes at closing time. It happened on a Tuesday. Dell would find this significant later in the way you find significance in the specific details of things once you understand what they were. At the time she noted it only because Tuesdays were slow. The club ran 4 nights a week and Tuesday was the night she kept because the building needed to be inhabited and the musicians needed the work and not every night had to justify itself economically. Tuesdays were for the regulars who came out of habit and for the occasional newcomer who had heard about the club from someone who knew someone. They were not nights for 2 bottles of the good champagne. They were not nights when Dell expected to be surprised. She should not have had enough to drink to be imagining things. She had not, in fact, had enough to drink to be imagining things. She had had 1 glass of the burgundy she kept for herself, and it had been 2 hours ago, which she would note later with the precision of someone assembling evidence for a case she hadn't yet decided to make. The club was down to its last 2 guests, a pair of men from somewhere in the south of France who had been deep in a conversation about wine that had been going on since before the kitchen closed and showed no particular signs of concluding. Clem was playing the slow, unresolved progression they had been working on for weeks, more quietly now, the music finding its late-night register. Dell was at the bar, running the last of the cloth over the mahogany before she put it away, and the room had the particular settled quality of a Tuesday well past midnight, orderly and warm and requiring nothing from her except to be in it. She turned to replace the cloth under the bar. When she turned back, there was a woman at the corner table. Dell's first thought was professional. She noted the table, the posture, the stillness, the clothes, with the rapid assessment of someone who had been reading rooms for years.
French.
Well-dressed, though the dress was slightly old-fashioned in a way that was either fashion or indifference. It was sometimes difficult to tell the difference in Paris. Dark hair, pinned. A quality of stillness that was not the stillness of someone waiting to be noticed, but of someone who had been in the room for some time and had not required noticing until now. Her second thought was also professional. She had not seen this woman come in. The side entrance. It could be opened quietly, and often was, by guests who arrived late and did not want to disturb what was already in progress. Dell had used it herself 100 times and knew exactly how little sound it made if you were careful. The woman had clearly been careful. Dell reached below the bar for a glass. She poured a measure of champagne, the courtesy she extended to late arrivals who had not yet ordered, which was a house practice she had established in year 1 and maintained because it cost very little and communicated the right things about the kind of club this was. Then she carried it across the room to the corner table. The woman looked up. The seal on Dell's wrist went from warm to briefly, startlingly hot. Dell did not spill the champagne. She was a professional. The glass reached the table in a smooth, controlled motion, and she set it down without visible difficulty, and she registered, with the part of her mind that was always cataloging, that her left hand was fractionally less steady than she would prefer. She pressed it, briefly, against the table's edge. The seal subsided into something that was not quite heat and not quite the absence of it, a kind of insistence, low and continuous, that she had never felt from it before and which she declined to examine in the present moment because she was at work. The woman's eyes were an unusual color, gray-green, variable, the color of river water in winter when the light was coming in flat from the side. They held Dell's gaze with a quality of attention that Dell recognized because she had it herself. The specific attention of someone who was not looking at you in a way that required a response, but was simply seeing you accurately and without agenda. Most people who looked at Dell in a sustained way were looking for something, a reaction, a confirmation, a signal that they were welcome. This woman was looking in the way you looked at something you already knew the answer to, and were simply verifying. "You keep the lights on very late," she said. Her English was accented. French first, English acquired, the words chosen with the slight extra weight of a person working in a language that was not native. The accent was not what Dell noticed. What Dell noticed was that the sentence had the quality of a line from a longer conversation that had been underway somewhere before Dell arrived at it.
"Someone has to," Dell said.
It was not the most interesting answer she had ever given. It was the answer that arrived, and it arrived with an ease that surprised her. Conversational, unguarded, as though she had been speaking to this woman for some time already. She was aware of this afterward in a way she wasn't in the moment. In the moment she was simply there, at the corner table, present in a way she didn't always feel at this hour. The woman looked at the champagne.
She did not touch it.
"Are you joining someone?" Dell asked, which was the professional question. "No," the woman said. Simply, without apology or elaboration. Dell looked at the two men from the south of France, who were still absorbed in their conversation and had not registered the new arrival. She looked at Clem, who had not visibly reacted but whose playing had done something subtle, slowed, moved a degree or two further into minor, in the way it did sometimes when Clem was paying attention to something no one had asked them to pay attention to. She had meant to ask whether the woman had a preference for wine. It was what she always asked Watkins at this hour. She did not ask this. Instead, she found herself standing at the corner table for a beat longer than was professionally justified, and then another beat after that, and the seal on her wrist held its insistent warmth, and the woman sat in her quality of stillness and did not seem to find Dell's presence or her silence unusual. "I'm Dell," she said. "It's my club." "I know," the woman said. Then the two men from the south of France, with the timing that guests occasionally had without knowing they had it, chose this moment to conclude their conversation about wine, settle their bill, and make their way to the door with a slightly surprised courtesy of people who had not realized how late it was. Dell excused herself to see them out. The brief, warm exchange at the door, the street cold rushing in for a moment, the door closed again, and then she turned back to the room. It was quiet. Clem had resolved the progression into something more settled, something that might have been the end. The corner table was lit by the candle she kept on it, which was burning steadily despite the draft from the door. The woman was still there. Dell crossed back to the bar and stayed there because she needed something to do with her hands, and the bar provided it. She wiped a glass that did not need wiping. Then she wiped another. Then she allowed herself to simply stand, the cloth in her hands, and look at the corner table, and the woman looked back with that unchanged quality of attention, and the room around them settled into the particular quiet of a Tuesday well past midnight with no one left in it but the two of them and Clem finishing the last bars of something slow. When Clem finished and rose from the piano and said their quiet good night and left, giving Dell, she noticed, a look that held rather more information than it released. Dell turned to the last of the closing work, counted the till, marked the ledger, checked the kitchen, the operations that closed the night, and prepared the room for tomorrow. She did them all with the awareness, continuous and steady as the warmth on her wrist, that there was a woman at the corner table. At midnight, she looked up from locking the ledger drawer. The corner table was empty. The champagne glass was untouched. The candle was burning. The chair was pushed in with a slight, careful precision of someone who had returned it to its position rather than pushing back from the table in the ordinary way people push back from tables. Dell crossed the room and stood at the table and looked at the untouched glass. She should check the side door. She should note in the evening's accounting that there had been a walk-in at 11:45. One woman, French, champagne declined. She should perform the standard closing operations and go to bed. She picked up the champagne glass. It was cold. Of course it was cold. It had been sitting untouched for 15 minutes. But she held it for a moment with both hands the way you hold something you are trying to understand through contact, which was not a rational thing to do, and the seal on her left wrist pulsed once, warm and definite, and she put the glass back down on the table. She did not touch the seal. She thought about touching it and then decided against it because she was not a person who gave things she did not understand the attention that would turn them into events. She was a person who filed things in the pending category and returned to them when she had more information. She had very little information. She filed it. She turned off the last lamp and went upstairs to bed and lay in the dark of her apartment with the city's particular November cold pressing at the window and the November quiet pressing at the inside, and thought, with the patient precision of someone arriving at the end of a very careful argument, I need to find out who she is. She let that thought sit. She let the one that came after it sit too, though she did not look at it directly, the way you avoided looking directly at certain things in the dark, because the looking would make them real. It sat in the room with her anyway. It had, she suspected, been sitting in the room for longer than one Tuesday at the end of November. I need her to come back.
She did not examine that.
She closed her eyes.
She did not sleep for some time.
Chapter 6. Reasonable Explanations. The side entrance, it turned out, could be opened silently from the outside if you lifted the latch at precisely the right angle while pulling the door toward you rather than simply pushing through. Dell discovered this on Wednesday morning by testing it 17 times in a row until she had confirmed the mechanism completely. The door had a slight warp in the lower left corner from years of damp, and if you caught it wrong it gave a brief complaint of wood against frame. The sound she should have heard on Tuesday night, would have heard, if someone had used it. She stood in the alley behind the club with the door open and considered this. The alley was empty. The morning was gray and cold and full of the smell of the city's particular November, wet stone, charcoal smoke, the distant bakery on the corner that started its ovens before 5 in the morning and made the whole block briefly warm with something that smelled of comfort. Dell stood with her hand on the door and went through it methodically. The woman had entered. She had not heard the door. Therefore the woman had either not used the door or had used it with a skill beyond ordinary discretion. Both explanations were available to her. She went back inside and made coffee. She spent the next 2 days being extremely reasonable. She examined the side entrance records, which did not exist as such, but which she reconstructed from her own memory of the evening's foot traffic. Everyone accounted for before 11. No additional arrivals she had noted. She reviewed what she knew about the effects of fatigue on visual perception, which was not medical knowledge, but was practical knowledge accumulated from years of closing a club at 2 in the morning. She was not fatigued on Tuesday. She had been alert and well-rested, as she was most Tuesdays, because she slept adequately and had always been one of those people for whom sleep worked correctly and without complaint. She was not, she concluded, imagining things due to fatigue. She considered champagne next. 1 glass of Burgundy, 2 hours prior, she had already established. She also considered the candle at the corner table, which had been burning low, which could in theory cast unfamiliar shadows if the wick was at a particular angle. She went down to the storage room and examined the candle inventory, found the same type she always ordered, determined that no unusual angle of wick could produce the shape of a sitting woman from the far side of the bar at a distance of 12 feet. She made a note of this, and then, because the note seemed like evidence of something she was not prepared to name, she threw the note away. She began staying later. This was not a decision she announced to herself as such. It was simply a series of small extensions. On Wednesday, she stayed until the accounts were balanced twice rather than once, which was a precaution she had not considered necessary in 4 years. On Thursday, she found a supply order that needed revisiting. On Friday, which was a busy night and therefore not Tuesday and therefore not relevant, she nonetheless remained in the club after Clem left and sat at the bar with a glass of water she did not drink and listened to the quality of the quiet. Nothing happened on Friday. This was expected. She went to bed at 1:30, which was earlier than she had stayed on Wednesday and Thursday, which meant she was not, in fact, simply staying late for operational reasons. She filed this also. On Saturday, Ruthie came for lunch at the small restaurant 2 streets over that they used for long conversations because the proprietor was hard of hearing and the tables were far enough apart. Ruthie ordered the duck. Dell ordered the potato soup, which she did not eat much of. "You're preoccupied," Ruthie said. "I'm thinking about the Thursday supply order." "You've been thinking about the Thursday supply order since I arrived. You have the look." "I don't have a look. The not thinking look. I told you about it. Ruthie cut her duck with the precise attention she gave to food she was enjoying. Is it the club? The accounts. The accounts are fine. Is it Margot? Margot is Margot. She's threatening to file a formal complaint with the city about the drain in the courtyard, which has been draining perfectly adequately for 30 years, but has recently developed what she describes as an attitude. It's not Margot. Ruthie looked at her in the specific way that meant she was deciding whether to ask the real question or let Dell maneuver around it for another 10 minutes. Dell, reading this correctly, picked up her soup spoon. The numbers have been good, she said. November is usually slower than October. This year it's held. Good, Ruthie said, and accepted this, which was generous of her. Afterward, walking home on the long way that took them past the market on the Rue Lepic and then down through the narrow streets where the buildings pressed close and the afternoon light came in at the particular angle that made Paris look like a painting of itself, Dell paused at the church on the corner of Rue Frocket. She had walked the street 3 or 4 times a week for 4 years. She knew the church. It was an old building, older than most of what surrounded it, with the weathered limestone facade and the narrow windows that characterized things built when light was a luxury and warmth was the greater concern. She had glanced at it 100 times in passing without stopping. She stopped now. Above the door, carved into the stone in the shallow relief that age had softened to almost nothing, was a mark, a seal. She had to look at it twice. Once quickly, the way you look at something you've caught in your peripheral vision and need to confirm, and then again slowly because the first look had already told her something she was not quite ready to receive. It was the same shape as the mark on her wrist. Not similar. The same. The same proportions. The same particular arrangement of lines that she had spent 32 years accepting as a coincidence of pigment because no other explanation had presented itself. She had walked past it 3 or 4 times a week for 4 years and had never once stopped to look. She stood there for perhaps a minute. Ruthie had continued a few steps ahead and turned back. Dell? Just looking at the carving, Dell said. Ruthie looked up at the church facade with the expression of someone humoring a sudden interest in architecture. It's old, she said. Yes. Do you want to go in? No, Dell said, and meant it absolutely, and began walking again at the same pace she had been walking before. She did not look back at the mark.
She was very deliberate about this.
Walking home, she passed 3 other buildings on streets she used regularly and examined them all with the particular attention of someone who had recently discovered that attention could cost something. None of them had a matching mark. The church on Rue Frocket was the only one she found, which meant either it was the only one in this neighborhood, or it was one of a kind in a way that had a meaning she was not ready to assign. She got home. She went downstairs and checked the club. Everything was in order for Saturday night. The corner table was, as it always was in the daylight hours, simply a table, dark wood, round top, 2 chairs, a candlestick. It did not look like anything in particular. It looked like furniture. She cleaned the bar, which was already clean. Then she went upstairs and made herself dinner and read the newspaper and went to bed at a reasonable hour, and in the morning when she woke she was certain, in the clear, unambiguous light of Sunday, that she was a practical woman with a well-run business and a comfortable life, and there was nothing to be concerned about. She almost believed it. She almost believed it the way she almost believed every Sunday morning that she had everything she needed. It was Tuesday that undid her. Chapter 7. She comes back. She came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Dell had not asked Clem to stay late. She had not rearranged the closing schedule or done anything that could be described, from the outside, as preparation. She had simply arrived at Tuesday in the ordinary way and found, when the last of the regular guests had gone and the room had settled into its closing time quiet, that she was not performing the closing operations on their usual schedule. She was standing at the bar with a clean glass in her hand that she had no particular purpose for. The woman arrived at the corner table with the same quality she had had the first time, present without a rival, there in the way that things were there when they had been for some time, and had simply decided to be visible. Dell set the glass on the bar. She crossed to the table. She brought the champagne, as she had the first time, and the woman received it with the same courtesy, neither refusing nor accepting, simply acknowledging its presence with the particular composure of someone for whom the gesture mattered though the object did not. They spoke for perhaps 20 minutes. The conversation was not long and it was not intimate, but it had a quality Dell found difficult to account for afterward, the sense of being in the middle of something rather than at its beginning. As though they had been talking for some time before tonight and had simply resumed. The woman asked her about the club. Not in the way guests asked, the curiosity about how she had come to Paris, the mild admiration, the questions that were really questions about themselves. She asked in the way you asked about something you were trying to understand completely. What Dell had changed, what she had kept, what the room had been when she found it. It was a storage space, Dell said. Before me. Before the storage space, the woman said. Dell looked at her. I don't know. The woman tilted her head the faintest degree. A small movement, precise, the way a compass needle moved when it found north. She said nothing further. When Dell looked up from refilling her own glass 10 minutes later, the chair at the corner table was empty. The champagne glass was untouched and cold. The second Tuesday was quieter. There were fewer guests, and they had all gone by 11, and Clem had played the room down to something very slow and then stopped and looked at Dell and said, without preamble, I'm going to head out. All right, Dell said. Clem put on their coat. At the door they paused, which they did not usually do. You good?
Fine, Dell said.
Go home, Clem. Clem went. Dell was alone in the room for perhaps 5 minutes, which she did not experience as 5 minutes but as a different kind of time, the kind of time that lives in the space before something happens, full of its own specific texture. She did not clean. She did not count the till. She sat on the stool behind the bar with her hands flat on the mahogany and listened to the room. The temperature dropped at the far end. She had felt it before, she realized. Over the previous weeks, at this same hour, the particular quality of the cold in that corner that was different from the draft at the window or the general cooling of the room as the candles burned lower. She had filed it as she had filed many things in the pending category. She retrieved it now. The woman was at the corner table. Dell did not ask how she had arrived. She brought the champagne. She sat down across from her with her own glass, which was the thing she had done last week and which she had decided she would do again because it had produced a conversation, and she had found, in the weeks since, that she had been returning to that conversation in the hours before sleep with a frequency that she did not care to analyze. They talked about Paris, about the way the city existed in layers, the current one, the recent ones, the older ones beneath, each generation of the city finding the bones of the previous ones still present in the stones and the streets. The woman knew this city's architecture the way someone knew it who had studied it with sustained attention. She knew which buildings had been different things. She knew which streets had been named for different reasons. How long have you been in Paris? Dell asked. A pause. Not the pause of someone thinking about an answer, but the pause of someone considering how much of an answer to give. Long enough to know it well, she said. That's not an answer. No, the woman agreed, with something that might have been amusement in the gray-green eyes, might have been something else. It isn't. Dell, let it alone. She had enough experience with people who were not ready to give you the whole of themselves to know that pressing was the surest way to lose what you already had. The third Tuesday, Dell set the corner table with 2 glasses before anyone arrived. She told herself this was hospitality. She told herself this while she was doing it, and was aware, while she was doing it, that she was telling herself a thing rather than believing it. Clem arrived, looked at the table, said nothing. Anything you want to play tonight?
Dell asked.
Whatever the room wants, Clem said, and sat at the piano and began to play the thing they had been working on, the slow, unresolved progression, which had apparently acquired several new bars in the past week and had moved into a key Dell couldn't name, but which felt like the late evening feels when you have stopped expecting it to become something else. The guests came and went. The room warmed and then cooled as it always did. At 11:45, when the last guest had settled her account and thanked Dell at the door, Dell turned back to find the woman already at the corner table. Clem was still playing. The 2 glasses waited on the table with the particular patience of things placed deliberately. Dell sat. They talked about smaller things this time. The cold, which had finally settled in properly after a week of temperature that couldn't decide. The wine, which Dell explained through the brief geography of her arrangement with the merchant on the Rue des Abysses, the man with the impeccable palate and the inconvenient opinions about storage. The woman listened with her full attention, which was a quality Dell noticed again because it was rare. People usually listen the way they ran errands, partly present and partly elsewhere. This woman was entirely here. At the end of the third visit, when Dell rose to finish the closing work and turned to the corner table, the woman was gone. She had not heard her leave. The candle at the table was burning. The chairs were pushed in carefully, both of them. Dell crossed the room. She picked up the champagne glass from the woman's side of the table. It was warm, not cold, not room temperature. Warm, the specific warmth of something that has been held in two hands, the warmth that required proximity and contact and time. Dell stood in the quiet room holding a warm glass that had been sitting on a table for 20 minutes and had no reasonable mechanism for being warm and understood, with the patient precision of a woman who had spent a week and a half assembling evidence she didn't want to reach a conclusion with, that her evidence had reached a conclusion without her. She set the glass back down. She pressed her left hand flat against the table, and the seal on her wrist burned gentle and slow, the way a coal burned when something fed it steadily from below. She thought, I need to find out who she is. This was the thought she'd had before. She let it settle. Then, quieter, in the part of her that was not assembling evidence, but was simply present in the room at midnight with the city sleeping outside, and a warm champagne glass in the candlelight, and the particular feeling of something she did not have a name for anymore because it had always had a name, and she had been the one refusing to use it. She needs to come back. She stood with that thought without explaining it away. She stood with it for a long time. Chapter 8. I don't know your name. She told Ruthie. She had accounts to finish. You finished the accounts Tuesday, Ruthie said, from the other end of the telephone that Dell had installed in the apartment 2 years ago at Ruthie's insistence, and that Ruthie used as though it were an extension of conversation rather than a separate apparatus requiring discretion. There are always more accounts.
Dell.
I'll come by Thursday for dinner. What time? A pause on the line, the specific pause of a woman choosing whether to press the issue or bank it for later. 7, Ruthie said. And you're going to tell me what's actually happening. 7, Dell agreed, and hung up with the ease of long practice. She had sent Clem home early. This was a thing she had done without much deliberation. At 10 o'clock, when the last guests of the evening were paying out and the room was winding down, she had simply said, Take the rest of the night, Clem. And Clem, who was perceptive in the way of people who knew when a room needed fewer people in it, had closed the piano and collected their coat and hat and gone without asking why. They had given her a look at the door. Not the look of someone who didn't know. The look of someone who did know and was choosing not to make it into an event. Dell had appreciated it more than she could have said, so she said nothing, and they both operated in the comfortable understanding that this was the better arrangement. Alone, she wiped the bar. Then she set it straight. Then she set the corner table with 2 glasses, not as hospitality, not as something she was telling herself, simply as an acknowledgement of what the evening was. The 4th Tuesday, the 4th time, and Dell Beaumont had made a decision she hadn't quite articulated even to herself, except in the way a decision is made when you begin doing the thing rather than waiting to decide. She sat at the corner table. This was new. She had always sat across from her, yes, but she had always started at the bar and moved when the woman arrived. Tonight, she had already moved. She was already seated, which was either confidence or surrender. She wasn't sure the distinction was meaningful. The temperature shifted at the far end of the room. The candle on the table burned very straight. The woman arrived. She sat, not the tentative sitting of a guest uncertain of her welcome, but the settled, unhurried sitting of someone returning to a place she knew. She looked at the 2 glasses. She looked at Dell. Something moved across her face that was not quite surprise but was in the same family. The expression of someone who had expected to find something and was adjusting the expectation slightly upward. Dell put her hands on the table, flat and deliberate. You've been coming here for weeks, she said. I don't know your name. A long pause. Not a deflecting pause. This woman did not deflect. Dell had come to understand. She simply made you wait while she decided what precision required. Then the faint, exact tilt of the head. The tell Dell had begun to recognize.
Isabelle, she said.
Isabelle Voclain. She did not offer her hand. Dell noticed this, filed it, moved on. Dell Beaumont, Dell said. Though you apparently already know that. Yes. Dell looked at her. You said that the first night. I know. She waited to see if Isabelle would explain it. Isabelle looked at her with those river-water eyes, steady and unhurried, and offered nothing. Are you going to tell me how? Not yet, Isabelle said. Dell absorbed this. It was, she had to admit, the kind of answer she respected, honest about its own limit, not a deflection but a deferred thing, something timed rather than withheld. She had given this kind of answer herself. She recognized its architecture. All right, she said. She poured the wine. Isabelle received it the same way she always received things, with acknowledgement rather than use, present in the gesture and absent from the thing itself, which was a quality Dell had been turning over for weeks without finding the name for. Do you want to tell me? Dell said. Why you only come at closing time? Isabelle tilted her head. The candlelight caught the dark of her hair and the paleness of her skin and the particular way she held herself. Medium height, careful posture, a beauty mark at the left collarbone that Dell had not noticed in the previous 3 weeks and noticed now with an attention she did not explain to herself. I don't think you're ready for that answer yet, she said. Dell looked at her for a long moment. You keep deciding what I'm ready for, she said. Not an accusation, an observation, offered with the mild precision she gave to facts. Yes, Isabelle said. And then, one beat after Dell expected it. Does it bother you? The honest answer was no. The honest answer was that she had been making the same determination about other people for 32 years, and she found it, from this side, comprehensible in a way that dissolved the complaint before it fully formed. She was the kind of person who understood the management of what you showed people and when, and she was sitting across from someone who appeared to operate by the same principle, and there was something in that recognition that did not bother her at all. What it did was something else she was not naming. Ask me again later, Dell said. Something shifted in Isabelle's expression. Brief, precise, the way a window reflected light at a particular angle and then didn't. She reached for the wine glass and did not drink from it, but turned the stem between her fingers with the absent attention of someone whose hands needed something to do, while the rest of them was occupied. They talked for a long time, or they talked for the length of time that felt like a long time from the inside, and was probably an hour, which Dell established later by the state of the candles. They talked about the neighborhood. Isabelle knew it in a way that went past current, that had depth and sediment to it, the way people knew places they had inhabited thoroughly. She knew which of the surrounding buildings had been rebuilt after the war. She knew the particular quality of the street in different weathers. She knew the baker by description rather than by name, though she gave the description the way you gave it when you had eaten the bread yourself. Dell noted all of this. She noted it and filed it alongside the untouched champagne and the warm glass and the woman's arrival without sound and her departure without announcement into the column of things she was no longer calling pending. Near the end of the hour, Isabelle said, "What did you want to be, before you became what you are?" The question arrived without preamble, in the way Isabelle's questions tended to arrive, fully formed, entirely considered, one beat after you expected it to be done. Dell felt it land with the specific weight of a question that had found the thing it was looking for. "I wanted to run something," Dell said after a moment. "I didn't know what. I knew I wanted to be the one making the decisions." "You are." "Yes." "Is it what you wanted?" Dell looked at the room around them. The mahogany bar, the low candles, the good bottles on the shelf, the corner table where she was sitting across from a woman whose name she had finally learned and whose nature she had not yet allowed herself to name. "It's more than I planned," she said. "I'm not sure planning was ever the right instrument for it." Isabelle looked at her. Then, quietly, "No," she said. "I don't think it was." The clock behind the bar read 1:30. Dell had not noticed the hour until now. She stood, which was the movement that ended these evenings, or had been in the previous 3, and looked across the table at Isabelle, who was still seated with the quality of someone who had nowhere else to be. "Same time next week," Dell said. It was not a question. Isabelle looked up at her. The candlelight made her eyes look more gray than green. "Yes," she said. Dell nodded. She turned to the closing work. When she looked back from the bar, the corner table was empty. Both chairs were pushed in. The candles on the table were still burning. The wine glass that had not been drunk from was in the same position it had been in all evening, perfectly still, as though it had been placed there by someone who intended to return and had simply not returned. Dell stood at the bar. She thought about the warmth she would feel if she walked over and picked that glass up. She stayed at the bar. She thought, she might be right. I might not be ready for that answer yet. She thought, I don't care. She closed the club and went upstairs, and Paris held its quiet November dark around the building, and the corner table was empty, and the name Isabelle Voclain sat in Dell's chest like a coal that had just been given air. Chapter 9. The B story begins. What Margot remembers. She asked Margot about the building on a Wednesday morning, over coffee that Margot made herself and served with the authority of a woman who considered the preparation of coffee one of the civilized arts and did not trust others with it unnecessarily. The coffee was excellent. It was always excellent. Dell had never told Margot this because it seemed like the kind of compliment that would produce an opinion about Dell's own coffee, which was functional and made without ceremony and had always served her adequately. The building, Margot said. She set down her cup and looked at Dell with the expression she reserved for questions she found interesting. Not the polite interest of someone being sociable, but the sharp, focused interest of a woman who had been waiting for a particular conversation and had finally been given the entry point she required. Which part do you want to know? Who lived here before me? Dell said. Before you, the printer. You know him, he's on the Rue des Abysses now, he waves. Before the printer. Margot considered. She picked up her coffee again and looked out the window at the courtyard, where the drain was sitting in what Margot described as its attitude, and which Dell continued to consider adequately functional. The courtyard light was flat and gray, late November, the sky the color of old linen. The ground floor was empty for 2 years before the printer, she said. There was some difficulty with the estate. The woman who had the apartment, your apartment and the club space below, she died in November 1918. The influenza. She said this with the particular directness of a French woman who had watched the influenza take what it took and had arrived at a relationship with the fact of it that was neither cold nor raw, but simply matter of fact, the way you spoke of weather. After that it was difficult. She had a brother, but he was young, and the estate was complicated. It's Saturday. Tell me about the woman, Dell said, in the casual register of someone who had arrived at a subject incidentally rather than by design. Margot looked at her. The look lasted longer than casual warranted, which was Margot's habit. She read people with the sustained attention of someone who had learned that the first reading was rarely complete. She was private, Margot said. She had been here. Let me think. She took this apartment in 1914, I believe. Perhaps 1913. I was on this floor already. She was young when she arrived, in her early 20s. She was from a good family, Southern, I think, Lyon or thereabouts. But she had come to Paris to work. She was an archivist. She worked for one of the institutions on the left bank, a library or archive, I never knew which precisely. What was she like? Margot considered this the way she considered things that required accuracy rather than mere description. She was the kind of person you noticed, she said finally. Not loudly. Quietly. The way you notice something when it is well made. She had a quality of attention that made you feel. She paused, searching. Seen, she said. She made you feel that she was paying real attention. It was uncommon. Dell looked at her coffee cup. She kept unusual hours. Margot continued, warming to it the way she always warmed to a story she had been waiting to tell. She was out late often. Not the late of someone at parties, the late of someone with places to be that were not conventional. I did not ask. In those years, before the war and during it, there were many people in this neighborhood who had places to be that were not conventional. It was not a neighborhood that asked questions, and she seemed to understand this. Margot paused. She had friends who came and went, women mostly. Some of them were the kind of women you understood immediately, and some of them were the kind you only understood later. Dell looked up. And she was one or the other? She asked. Margot met her eyes with the directness of a woman who had not reached 58 by being evasive about the things that mattered. She was one of the later kind, she said. The kind you only understood after you knew her for a while, and then it was simply a fact, like the color of her hair. She was herself entirely by the time I knew her well. I think it had not always been so simple. I think Paris had been the place where it became simple. She had been here only a few years when she died. She paused again. That was a waste, she said, in a tone that was not sentimental but was exact. Dell was quiet. She had the particular stillness of someone who was receiving a great deal of information and was choosing not to react to any piece of it until she had the whole. Was there anything unusual about her? She asked. The way she was described. Things she knew, or seemed to know. Margot looked at her for a moment with a quality of attention that sharpened. You're asking about something specific, she said. I'm asking generally. You're asking generally in a very specific way. But Margot was not unkind about it. She set down her cup and folded her hands on the table with the deliberate quality of a woman organizing what she was about to say. There were stories, she said, in the neighborhood, about her, that she knew things she should not have known, that she had told the woman on the corner that her son would come home from the Eastern Front before the news had arrived, and he had, that she had described a person to someone in the market who then met that person, exactly as described, 6 months later. Margot looked at Dell calmly. I don't know what to make of such stories. I only know that the people who told them were not foolish people. Dell said. What was her name? Margot said. Isabelle Voclain. The name landed in the room. Dell's left hand moved to the bar's surface on pure reflex, flat, pressing, studying. She had not been sitting near the bar. She had been at Margot's kitchen table. Her hand pressed flat against the kitchen table instead, and she felt the grain of the wood under her palm and breathed once, evenly, and let the information settle in its proper place. Did you know her well? She asked. Her voice was her working voice, level, unhurried. Well enough, Margot said, watching her. As well as she permitted. She was private, as I said. She was a careful woman. A pause. She was waiting for something. I always felt that about her. She was a person who was oriented toward something ahead, something she could see that I couldn't. Margot picked up her coffee. I did not know what it was. I don't think she told anyone what it was. Dell thanked her. She drank the rest of her coffee, which was still excellent. She descended the stairs to the ground floor with the particular steadiness of someone holding themselves together through familiar motion. In the club, she went to the cellar stairs. She had been avoiding the cellar for 6 weeks in the specific way you avoided something that had been waiting for you long enough to develop patience. She descended the stairs into the cool dark, found the pull cord for the single bare bulb, and stood in the low light looking at what had been left there when she took the lease. A trunk, old and brass-fitted, a stack of papers bundled with twine, a hatbox with a lid that had warped slightly in the damp, various objects of the kind that accumulated when a life was packed up by someone who hadn't lived it. And an envelope. She had seen it before, the one time she had glanced down here in her first week, and had left it because it hadn't seemed urgent, because eventually was a longer word than she'd been giving it credit for. It was sitting on top of the trunk where she had seen it. She had not moved it. No one had moved it. It had simply been here all along, waiting with the patience of something that had been waiting for a while and did not expect to stop. It was sealed. The seal on the envelope was a small mark of dark wax, a circular shape with an arrangement of lines inside that she recognized without looking at her wrist, because she already knew what it looked like. She picked it up. It was heavier than an envelope should be. Not heavy, the weight of several sheets of paper, the weight of something written at length, but heavier than she had expected, which was another way of saying it was exactly as heavy as it needed to be, and she had been expecting nothing. She stood in the cellar with the envelope in both hands. The seal on her wrist was warm, steady and low and warm, the way it had been every Tuesday since November. She turned the envelope over. It was addressed to no one. The handwriting on the front was neat and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had been taught to write carefully and had continued to do so. The wax seal on the flap had the same mark, unmistakable now, the shape she had explained as pigment and coincidence for 32 years looking back at her in dark red wax. She did not open it. She was not ready. She was almost ready, which was a different thing. Almost ready was the condition of someone who had all the necessary information and was still negotiating with themselves about what to do with it. She could feel the negotiation underway. She gave it the acknowledgement it deserved, and then she turned back to the stairs. She sat on the cellar floor instead. Just for a moment, the concrete cool through the wool of her trousers, the bare bulb overhead making the shadows long. She held the envelope in her lap. She thought of Isabelle at the corner table. The gray-green eyes. The sentences that arrived one beat after you expected them. The head tilted slightly before something true. She thought of Margot saying, she was a person who was oriented towards something ahead. She thought, she's been here since 1918, and she's still here. She thought, she knew my name before I told it to her. She sat on the cellar floor for a while longer, with the envelope in her lap and the seal on her wrist burning steady, and the city above her going about its late November business, entirely indifferent to the fact that a woman in a cellar on the roof rocket was finally beginning to ask the right questions. She put the envelope back on top of the trunk. Not yet, she told herself. Tomorrow, she told herself. She went back upstairs and did not sleep well, and told herself that was unrelated to anything. Chapter 10. What the Walls Know. December came. The city adjusted itself for winter with the practiced ease of a place that had done this many times and had developed opinions about it. The chestnut cellars appeared on the corners. The light shifted from November's flat gray to December's particular blue-gray, a colder tone, the shadows longer by 4 in the afternoon and the evenings beginning before the working day was done. Margot sealed her window box with oilcloth and declared the outdoor season finished with the ceremonial finality of a woman closing a chapter. Clem began wearing the second coat, the heavier one, which they stored at the club in the closet by the kitchen because it was too thick to carry on the walk over. Dell noticed all of this in the peripheral way she noticed the operational details of her world. Logged, filed, requiring nothing further. What was not peripheral was Tuesday. The Tuesdays had settled into something she did not examine directly, but could feel the shape of when she was not looking at it. The way you feel the shape of a room in the dark by moving through it. They had acquired a rhythm. The club would run its regular night. Clem playing, the guests arriving and staying and leaving, Dell managing the room with the easy authority she had been perfecting for 4 years. And then at some point after the last guests went, Isabelle would be at the corner table, and Dell would be across from her, and they would talk. The talking was not like other conversations. Dell had been having conversations her whole life. Efficient ones, warm ones, the useful ones that move things forward, and the social ones that maintained relationships, and the occasional ones, with Ruthie, that were genuinely honest in the way that required something from her. She knew what conversations felt like. She knew the particular texture of talking with someone who was paying close attention versus talking with someone who was managing the impression they made. She had become, over 32 years, and especially over the last 7 in Paris, a reasonably accurate reader of the difference. Isabelle was paying close attention. Not the attention of someone who wanted something from you. Not that kind, which had its own detectable flavor, a directionality you could feel when it was present. This was a different quality. The attention of someone who already knew a great deal and was verifying it. The attention of someone who was interested in the specific, true version of you rather than the version you'd been presenting for general consumption. Dell found this, against her better judgment, entirely welcome. In the 5th week, Isabelle asked, "What did you want to be before you understood what you were?" The question was specific enough to require more than the answer Dell had given to the previous version of it, that she'd wanted to run something, to make the decisions. This was asking something different. She turned her glass. She considered. "I wanted to not have to explain myself," she said. "I didn't have a word for it yet when I was young. I just wanted a life where what I was didn't require management, where I could be it without it costing something every day." Isabelle was very still. "Is that what you have now?" she asked. Dell looked around the room. The club, the bar, the candles. The life she had assembled piece by piece from $40 and a borrowed tuxedo and 7 years of work. The reputation for discretion. The room that was full for nights a week of people who had grown tired of apologizing. "Mostly," she said. "The geography helps. Paris asks fewer questions than Chicago." "But you still ask them," Isabelle said. "Of yourself." It was not a question. Dell looked at her and found the gray-green eyes already looking back, level and exact. I'm a practical woman, Dell said.
Yes, Isabelle said.
One beat. That isn't what I asked. Dell pressed her left hand flat against the bar's edge. The seal pulsed once, slow, like a question being asked from the inside. She had stopped pretending, in these conversations, that she didn't notice it. She had not addressed it directly. Isabelle had mentioned it once weeks ago. I've seen it before, and Dell had filed the comment alongside everything else she was still deciding what to do with. Why do you keep looking at my wrist? She asked. Isabelle's head tilted, the faint precise movement that preceded truth. Because I'm glad it's there, she said. Dell waited for more. There was no more. Isabelle looked at her with the particular composure of someone who has said exactly what they intended to say and will neither expand nor retract it, and Dell understood that she was being given something in careful installments, that the whole of it would arrive when it was ready to arrive, and that pressing would not accelerate the schedule. She was learning this woman in the way you learned a piece of music you couldn't sight read, not by forcing it, but by returning to it repeatedly until the pattern became clear. In the 6th week, she noticed. The candle at the corner table had been burning for 2 hours when she finally registered what she had been registering without registering for several weeks. Isabelle did not cause the candle to flicker. A person sitting near a candle, simply by the displacement of air that came with breath and movement and the slight heat of a living body, would cause the flame to move. It moved for Dell when she sat at this table. It moved for Clem when they passed. It moved for every guest in the room at every hour. It did not move for Isabelle. Dell watched this for 10 minutes without making it visible that she was watching. The candle burned perfectly straight. Dell moved her own hand near the flame, and it shivered immediately. Isabelle turned slightly in her chair, which should have disturbed the air enough to produce at least a fraction of a flicker, and the flame stayed absolutely vertical. She was still watching this when Clem, in the other room, began playing something Dell had not heard them play before, slow, deliberate, with a quality of attention in each note that suggested they were not so much playing a song as addressing something directly. The melody moved through the door and into the room, and Isabelle turned her head toward the sound. The playing stopped. Clem, Dell said, not loudly. Still here, Clem said from the other room. They resumed, the same melody, slower, the notes chosen with the care of someone feeling their way through dark they could see a little bit of but not all of. Dell looked at Isabelle. Does Clem know? She asked. Isabelle considered. Clem knows something, she said. Not everything. Something. Clem hasn't said anything to me. No, Isabelle said. One beat. They wouldn't. Dell absorbed this. The 3 of them in the building at this hour. Dell, Isabelle, Clem on the other side of the door, each occupying a different register of the same knowledge. It would have been comic if it hadn't been, underneath the comedy, something else entirely. Something she was still negotiating. She asked, Does the seal bother you? And then stopped, because that was not what she had meant to say. She had meant to ask Isabelle directly about the seal. What had come out was Isabelle's own question from weeks ago, the one Dell had not answered, returned to Isabelle now by accident or by the logic of the conversation, or by some other mechanism she could not account for. Isabelle looked at her with something that was not quite surprise and not quite amusement, and was most precisely the expression of a person who recognizes a thing returning to where it began. No, she said. It doesn't bother me. I've been looking at it for a very long time. Dell went still. That's not possible, she said. Isabelle met her eyes. The gray-green steady, the candlelight not moving. I know, she said quietly. And then, after a beat, ask me again when you're ready for the whole answer. Dell looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the candle, which was burning perfectly still. She thought of the warm champagne glass in her hands at the end of the 3rd Tuesday. She thought of the side entrance she had tested 17 times. She thought of the name on Margot's lips. Isabelle Voclain. She died in November 1918. And the name on the envelope in the cellar in dark red wax, which she had not opened, which had been sitting on top of the trunk waiting for her to be ready. She thought, I know what I'm not saying. She thought, she knows what I'm not saying. She thought, The candle has not moved once in 6 weeks of Tuesdays, and I have been explaining everything else and not that. All right, she said. It was not agreement, and it was not surrender. It was the word of a woman who had decided that the negotiation was over, that whatever she was about to learn was something she had already been moving toward for longer than this building, longer than Paris, longer, possibly, than the version of herself she had built over the warrant of Vera's kitchen table. The candle burned straight. Clem played something final, in the next room. Isabelle Voclain looked at Dell Beaumont across a corner table in the candlelight, and did not flicker, and Dell looked back, and the seal on her wrist burned steady, and neither of them looked away. Chapter 11. The First Letter. She opened the envelope on a Wednesday morning. Not the following Wednesday, the one after that. She had carried the knowledge of it for 11 days the way you carried something heavy that you had convinced yourself was not heavy, adjusting your posture around the weight until the adjustment became your posture, until you had forgotten that standing straight had ever felt different. On the 12th day, she went downstairs at 7 in the morning before the coffee was made, before she had done anything to prepare herself, because she had understood during the night that preparation was another word for delay, and she had delayed long enough. The cellar was cold. The bare bulb made the shadows long, and the corners deep. The envelope was where she had left it, on top of the trunk with the brass fittings, sitting with the patience of something that had been waiting for long enough that it had stopped expecting, and was simply being. She picked it up. She carried it upstairs to the club, and sat at the bar, and broke the wax seal with her thumbnail. It came apart cleanly, the way things came apart when the time was right. The seal was the mark she knew, the same lines, the same proportions, and it yielded without resistance. Inside were 4 pages, folded together. The handwriting was the same deliberate hand as the address on the outside, careful, even, each letter given its full space. The ink had gone slightly brown at the edges in the way of ink that was 7 years old and had been in a cellar for most of them. The paper was good quality, the kind used by someone who considered what they put words on. At the top of the first page, a date. November 1918. Dell read. The letter did not begin with a name or a greeting. It began in the middle of a thought, as though the writer had been composing it in her head for a long time and was setting down only the part that could not wait longer. I am leaving this for whoever comes after me, because I have been in this room long enough to understand that someone will. I do not know when. I do not know from where. What I know is that this building will be a place that holds what I have put into it, and that the right person will recognize the holding when they arrive, and that they will need to find this eventually. I have been an archivist by trade. I understand that things must be recorded to persist. I am recording this. I am leaving you the club, not the building, which is not mine to leave. The feeling, the hour after the last guest. The particular honesty of a room at closing time when the people in it are no longer performing for anyone. This quality exists in certain places and can be sustained in them if someone who understands it is willing to tend it. I have been tending it here since 1915 in whatever form it took. I am leaving the tending to you. If you have found this letter, you're already doing it. You recognize the room. The room recognized you. That is how it works. I salted it into the walls. I am sorry if that sounds strange. I could not think of a better inheritance, and I thought about it for a long time. There is a second letter. You're not ready for it yet. When you are, it will be heavier than this one, not in pages, but in the way it sits in your hands. You will know.
Take care of the piano.
It remembers things. IV. Dell read it once.
She set it on the bar.
She looked at it for a moment the way you looked at something after you had read it. Not rereading, just being with it, the way you sat with a piece of music after it had finished, and the room was still vibrating with the last chord. Then she read it again. The third time through, she was not reading so much as accounting. The letter confirmed what she had been not saying for 11 days, that the building had been prepared, that the feeling of the room, the late-hour honesty she had recognized when she took the lease and had been building on ever since, had been here before her, had been deliberately put here, had been waiting for someone who would know what to do with it. She had known what to do with it. From the first walk-through with the letting agent, she had known. She had stood in the empty room and felt it and signed the lease the same day, which was not how she operated. She had told herself it was the price and the location and the particular quality of the natural light through the high windows. She had told herself a number of things.
Yves.
She sat with the initials. She sat with them until they had arranged themselves into the only shape they fit. Then she folded the letter carefully, the way you folded something you intended to keep, and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, against her sternum, where she had always kept the things that mattered most without having examined why she kept things there rather than anywhere else. She went upstairs. She knocked on Margot's door. Margot answered in her dressing gown, which she wore with the same authority she wore everything, and looked at Dell with the expression of a woman who had been expecting a visit and had simply not known which morning it would arrive.
"Come in," she said.
"I've just made coffee." The coffee was excellent, as it always was. Dell sat at Margot's table. The same table, the window with the same gray December light, the courtyard drain doing its quiet attitude below, and held the cup in both hands and looked at Margot. "The woman who lived in my apartment," she said. "The one who died in 1918. You told me she was an archivist, that she had unusual hours, that she was the kind you only understood after a while." She paused. What was her full name? Margot looked at her steadily, over the rim of her cup. "I told you her name already," she said. "Tell me again." "Isabelle Voclain," Margot said. "She died in November 1918, as I said. The influenza took her in the 3rd week of November. She was 31 years old." The number settled in Dell like a stone settling in water, finding the bottom. 31. Dell was 32. She looked at the coffee cup. She thought about the corner table. She thought about the gray-green eyes and the sentences that arrived one beat after she expected them and the candle that had not flickered once in 6 weeks of Tuesday evenings. She thought about the warm champagne glass. She thought about "I've seen it before," said of the seal on Dell's wrist, said with the particular composure of someone telling a true thing about which she felt no need to apologize. She pressed her left hand flat against Margot's table. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was her working voice, the level, unhurried one she used when she was moving through something she had decided to move through without stopping. The coffee was very good. Margot looked at her for a long moment with the sustained attention she gave to things she was deciding how to respond to.
"Dell," she said.
"I'm all right." "I know you are," Margot said. "I'm going to say something anyway." She set down her cup with the decisive click of a woman making space for what she was about to say. She was a remarkable person. I knew her for 4 years. She was worth knowing. Whatever you found down there, whatever you're putting together, she was worth the knowing. Dell looked at her.
"You knew," Dell said.
"Not an accusation. A recognition." "I suspected," Margot said, with the precision of a woman who would not overstate.
"For some weeks now."
"The way you've been at closing time. The way you ask about the building." She paused. "The way you look when you come upstairs at 2 in the morning." Dell did not ask what way that was. She had, she suspected, already been told everything she needed to know about what way that was. She thanked Margot again, and went downstairs. She went through the club, the bar, the tables, the chairs, the morning light coming in flat through the high windows, and she stood for a moment in the middle of the room with her hand in her jacket pocket, her fingers resting on the folded letter, and she thought, she was 31. She died in November, the same month I closed the club tonight, the same month I first looked up from the bar, and she was there. She thought, she left this room to me on purpose, and I have been running it for 4 years, and every closing time I have been standing in something she built and felt the shape of it without knowing whose hands had made the shape. She thought, there is a second letter. You are not ready for it yet. She was not ready for it yet. She was close. She could feel the closeness of it the way you felt the closeness of a thing when you had been moving toward it steadily, and the distance had finally become the kind you could measure. She needed one more Tuesday. Maybe 2. She went behind the bar and picked up the cloth and wiped the mahogany, which was already clean, because it was Wednesday morning and she had cleaned it properly on Tuesday night, and she wiped it again because her hands needed something to do, and the bar had always been the thing she was most certain of. The club had been someone else's first. The room had been tended before her. The particular feeling of the late hour, the honesty she had built her whole enterprise on, the thing she had recognized and claimed as her own, had been put here by a woman who had died at 31 and had known, apparently, that someone was coming who would know what to do with it. Dell wiped the bar. She thought, I have been running someone's love for 7 years and calling it mine. She thought, maybe that's the same thing. She put the cloth down. She looked at the corner table. Isabelle's table, which was simply a table with 2 chairs and a candlestick until this moment, and was, now irrevocably, something else. She said, to the empty room, all right. It was not a greeting. It was not a surrender. It was the word of a woman who had assembled all the available evidence and arrived at the only conclusion the evidence supported, and who had decided that this was going to be the last morning she spent explaining it away. She would wait for Tuesday. She sat down at the corner table to wait. Chapter 12. You're dead. She was already seated when Isabelle arrived. She had been seated for 20 minutes. In fact, the last 2 guests long gone, Clem's coat already off the hook and their footsteps already faded down the street, the room in its closing time state of emptied warmth. Dell had not performed the closing operations. The till was uncounted. The cloth was on the bar where she had left it. The kitchen door was standing slightly open. She had sat down at the corner table with 2 glasses and both hands flat on the wood, and she had waited with the patience of someone who had spent a week doing very little else. The temperature shifted at the far end of the room. Isabelle was there. She sat with the settled quality she always brought to the table, the unhurried arrival of someone returning to a place they knew. She looked at Dell. She looked at the 2 glasses. She looked at Dell again, and this time there was something in her expression that was not the usual composure, something fractionally more present, or more prepared. As though she too had been waiting for a particular Tuesday, and this was it. Dell said, "You're dead." Not a question. She had been deciding, over the course of the week, whether to phrase it as a question, and had concluded that it was not a question. It was a statement of fact, the same kind she had been making her whole adult life in situations that required clarity rather than diplomacy. "You're dead. Here it is. We can proceed from here." Isabelle said, "Yes." One word, delivered with the even quality of something she had been carrying for a long time and had grown neither lighter nor heavier with the carrying. Not a confession, a confirmation. As though she had been waiting for Dell to name the thing, so they could both stop working around it. Dell looked at her. She had expected. She did not know what she had expected. Something. A different quality in the air, some visible change now that the word had been spoken. The room felt the same. The candle on the table was burning with its customary perfect stillness. Isabelle was sitting across from her looking exactly as she always looked, luminous, composed, the dark hair slightly loose in the way it always was when she appeared, the good dress that was 7 years out of fashion, the gray-green eyes that were watching Dell with the particular attention that Dell had spent 6 weeks learning to receive. "How long have you known that I knew?" she asked. Isabelle considered the question with the gravity she gave to questions that deserved it. "Since you went to the cellar," she said. "Before that, I suspected. After, yes. I knew. Why didn't you tell me?" The head tilted. "You weren't asking." Dell opened her mouth and then closed it, because this was, with the infuriating precision of most things Isabelle said, exactly accurate. She had not been asking. She had been cataloging and filing and explaining and testing the side entrance 17 times and wiping a bar that did not need wiping, and she had not asked. She had constructed an architecture of not asking elaborate enough to furnish a small building, and she had lived in it for 7 weeks, and Isabelle had sat across from her in the candlelight every Tuesday and waited for her to be finished with it. "All right," Dell said. She poured from the bottle she had left open on the table. Not Isabelle's glass. She had long since accepted that Isabelle would not drink from the glass, that the glasses were a formality she maintained because the formality meant something even if the object didn't. She poured her own. She held it. "Tell me what you can," she said. Isabelle's hands were folded on the table in front of her, the posture she held when she was giving something her full consideration. "What do you want to know first?" she asked.
Dell thought about this.
There were a number of questions with equal claim on first position. She ranked them by practicality, the way she ranked everything. "How long have you been here?" "Since 1918, Isabelle said. "Since November. I didn't leave. Couldn't or chose not to?" A pause. The particular pause of someone measuring precision.
Both, she said.
In the beginning, I don't think I could have. Later, she stopped.
Considered.
There was something I needed to see completed. I didn't know what form the completion would take. I waited to find out. Dell looked at her. The letter.
The letters, Isabelle said.
There are two. I've read one.
Yes, Isabelle said.
I know. Dell put down her glass. She looked at Isabelle. Really looked, the way she had been looking with increasing directness for weeks, the way she had been allowing herself to look since the night she had picked up the warm champagne glass and stopped pretending she didn't know what it meant. The pale skin, the beauty mark at the left collarbone. The quality of stillness that she now understood was not the stillness of patience, but the stillness of someone who existed at a different register of time than the living, adjacent to it, recognizable within it, but not inside it the same way Dell was inside it. Does it? She stopped. Found the question more difficult than she'd expected, not because she didn't want the answer, but because she was not certain she knew how to ask it with the gentleness it deserved. Does it hurt, being here? Isabelle looked at her for a moment. Then something moved across her face. Not pain, nothing so large, but something that was the ghost of a feeling, the memory of one. It was a particular kind of lonely, she said. In the years before you came, the building was empty, or had tenants who couldn't feel the room the way it was meant to be felt. That was its own thing. A pause. It has not been lonely since November. Dell held that. She had not expected to feel what she felt when Isabelle said that. She had been managing her way through this conversation with the competence she brought to most difficult things, the forward-moving efficiency of a woman who had decided she was going to be all right and was being all right through the force of having decided it. And then Isabelle said it has not been lonely since November with the simple accuracy of someone reporting a fact, and Dell's left hand found the table's edge and pressed flat against it. Why Dell, she said. Why my club? Why me specifically? Isabelle's head tilted. There is a second letter, she said. You will understand it better when you read the whole of it. What I can tell you now is, the seal was made for this. For finding. I don't know how to explain the mechanism of it more simply than that. The seal on your wrist and the seal I left on the letter are part of the same thing. It drew you to the building. It drew me to the right hour. She paused. I knew someone was coming. I knew the shape of them. I didn't know when. Dell stared at her. You knew the shape of me? Yes. Before we met? Yes. Dell breathed. She was a practical woman. She had built her whole adult life on the twin foundations of practicality and precision, on the belief that things could be understood if you were patient and thorough and refused to let sentiment cloud the accounting. She was looking at a woman who had died in 1918 and was sitting across from her in the candlelight in 1925 telling her that she had known the shape of her before she arrived, and the practical precision of Dell Beaumont required her to account for this, to file it, to find its place in the ledger she kept of the world. She found, unexpectedly, that she was not afraid of it. She was something else. Something that didn't quite fit in the categories she had been using. I'm going to find out who you were, she said. Your history, your life, all of it. Something shifted in Isabelle's expression. Something that had been, not held exactly but reserved. Kept in the interior place things were kept when you were not certain they would be welcomed. It moved now toward the surface of her face, and what it looked like when it arrived was relief. The specific, long-delayed relief of something that had been kept waiting long past the hour it expected to be called for. I know, she said. Dell looked at her. You've been waiting for me to say that. I've been waiting, Isabelle said, for a great many things. One beat. You are not the most efficient road I have traveled. Dell felt it before she expected to. The laugh that came up from somewhere she didn't manage, quick and unguarded, a sound she rarely made in rooms by herself. It lasted only a moment. But Isabelle was looking at her when it happened, and the quality of Isabelle's looking had changed by the time the room went quiet again, softer at the edges or more present, something Dell did not have the exact vocabulary for but registered completely. Tell me what I should know first, Dell said. Of your history. What's the right place to begin? Isabelle considered. My brother, she said.
Henri.
He is still living. He works in the 7th arrondissement. He She paused with the precision of someone measuring what could be said against what could be borne. He knows what he knows. He will not be easy to approach, but he is the key to the rest of it. I'll find him. I know you will, Isabelle said. And then, quietly, take care with him. He has been carrying this a long time. He did not have anyone to carry it with. Dell noted the things she heard beneath this, the thing Isabelle was not saying about what it meant to carry something without anyone to carry it with. She had spent 32 years conducting that particular research project. She did not say this. She did not say it because the hour was already late and the candles were low and there were things between them that were still arriving at their proper time, and she had learned, in 7 weeks of Tuesdays, to respect the schedule. She refilled her glass. Same time next week, she said. Isabelle looked at her. The gray-green eyes, the particular composure of someone who had survived the worst thing and had come through it still entirely herself. I'll be here, she said. Dell nodded. She rose to do the closing work. She counted the till, marked the ledger, banked the kitchen fire, moved through the familiar operations with the familiar efficiency. She checked the side door. She collected the glasses. She left Isabelle's glass on the corner table. When she turned at last to do the final lamp, the corner table was empty. The chair was pushed in carefully. The glass was there, the wine undisturbed and still in it, and Dell crossed the room and stood over it, and this time she did not pick it up. She simply looked at it. The small, ordinary glass, the wine going slightly dark in the candlelight, and thought, she has been here since 1918. She thought, she said it hasn't been lonely since November. She thought, I am going to find Henri Voclain tomorrow morning. She put out the last candle and went upstairs, and the city received the night around the building, and somewhere in the room below the temperature held a degree warmer than it should have. Dell, for once, did not explain it away. Chapter 13. What Ruthie Sees. The thing about Dell Beaumont, Ruthie had decided some time ago, was that she was the most legible, unreadable person Ruthie had ever known. Which was to say, Dell was extremely good at being opaque, had been practicing it for the entire 15 years Ruthie had known her in one city or another, and had developed the skill to such a fine point that most people did not realize they were being managed. But Ruthie was not most people. Ruthie had spent enough time in the specific company of Dell Beaumont, at kitchen tables, in arguments about minor matters, through the accumulated evidence of 4 years of friendship across 2 countries and an ocean, to know the difference between Dell being actually all right and Dell having decided to be all right, which were related states that looked very similar from a distance and were completely different from up close. Dell had been deciding to be all right for 6 weeks. The first sign had been the Tuesday evenings. Dell had always stayed late on Tuesdays. Tuesdays were low-traffic nights, and Dell was the kind of person who used the quiet nights for operational maintenance, the ordering and accounting and small repairs that the busier nights didn't permit. This was normal. What was not normal was that Dell had begun staying later than usual, not in the productive way of someone with a specific task to finish, but in the particular way of someone who had somewhere she preferred to be, and it was here. Ruthie had established this through the reliable method of arriving at the club on a Wednesday morning several times in a row and noting, from the fresh state of the candles and the quality of the silence of a room that had been inhabited very recently by someone in a state of concentrated attention, that Dell had not gone to bed until late. Not working late. Inhabiting late. There was a difference. The second sign had been the questions about the building. Dell was a person of present-tense attention. She did not, as a rule, excavate. She had moved through Paris for 7 years with the forward momentum of someone who had decided that the past was a place you visited only when it was operationally necessary, and had maintained this position against considerable temptation because Paris was full of history, and Dell, whatever she claimed, was not indifferent to history. The fact that she had asked Margot about the building. Ruthie had gotten this from Margot directly, who had volunteered it with the enthusiasm of a woman who had been sitting on a piece of intelligence and had finally found a sympathetic listener, meant that something or someone had made the building's past feel urgent. The third sign was the current state of Dell's face. Ruthie was looking at it now, across the table at the restaurant they used for long conversations because it was quiet and the proprietor minded his own business, and the duck was reliably good. Dell had ordered the potato soup, which she was not eating, which was itself information. Dell had a healthy relationship with food in the way of someone who treated the body as infrastructure requiring maintenance, and she ate reliably and without drama. Not eating the potato soup meant she was occupied in some part of her attention that ordinarily managed the eating of soup. She was occupied. She had been occupied for 6 weeks in a way that Ruthie had been trying to name and had not yet successfully named, because the name it wanted to be was one she wasn't sure Dell would accept the accuracy of. "Tell me something that isn't about the club," Ruthie said. Dell looked up from the soup. "I've been thinking about the building's history," she said. "I know. Margot told me." Something moved across Dell's face. Not alarm, which Dell did not do, but the closely related expression of a person recalibrating. "Margot talks to you." "Margot talks to everyone," Ruthie said, with the affectionate accuracy of 15 years of Margot, "but she talks to me specifically because I ask the right follow-up questions." "What have you found?" Dell was quiet for a moment. This was not the quiet of someone who did not have an answer. This was the quiet of someone who had several answers and was selecting the one that was sufficient without being complete. The management Dell quiet, the quiet that preceded a version of the truth rather than the truth itself. Ruthie had a finite amount of patience for management Dell. She had been patient for 6 weeks. She was running low.
"Dell," she said.
"I'm not going to push you to say something you're not ready to say.
You know that."
She cut her duck with precise attention. "I'm going to ask you one question, and you can answer it however you choose, and then we can talk about Etienne for the rest of the meal if you want to. But I am going to ask the question." Dell looked at her. "All right. Is she good to you?" The silence was different this time. It was not management Dell's quiet, not the pause before a strategic selection. It was something else, something Ruthie had not heard from Dell before, or had heard very rarely, the kind of quiet that happened when a question had arrived at a place where management couldn't reach, and the person you were looking at was unexpectedly standing in the open. Dell's left hand, which was resting on the edge of the table, pressed flat.
"Yes," she said.
One word, like a stone placed carefully in a specific position, like something she had been holding and had finally set down. Ruthie looked at her. She had known, in a theoretical sense, she had been knowing things for 6 weeks, that Dell was in love with whoever was keeping her at the club until 4 in the morning. She had known it the way you knew things through accumulated evidence, the sleepless Wednesdays, the untouched soup, the quality of Dell's attention when she was in a room, and also, very clearly, somewhere else. She had known it in the way of a friend who has watched another friend for 15 years and has learned the texture of the absence that precedes the arrival of something important. But she had not known it in her chest until now. Until Dell said yes with that particular quality of having decided to mean it. "Dell," Ruthie said. "It's complicated," Dell said. "I know it's complicated. Is she here in Paris?" A pause. In a manner of speaking, Ruthie examined this. "That's a very specific kind of evasion," she said. "Is she French?" "Yes." "Does she know you're—" Ruthie gestured, briefly, at the general situation of Dell's feelings, which she understood even when she couldn't name them precisely. "She knows considerably more about me than I've told her," Dell said, with the dry flatness that was Dell's humor when she was talking about something that had undermined her. "That seems to be her nature." Ruthie looked at her for a long time. Dell looked back with the steadiness she maintained even when she was dismantled, which was one of the things Ruthie had always respected and occasionally found maddening about her. The equanimity held, even when it was clearly costing something. "You're in love with her," Ruthie said. Dell picked up her soup spoon and looked at it and put it down. "Ruthie."
"Dell." She said it gently.
Not as a pressure, but as a reminder. "I see you, I have been seeing you, this is a safe room for the real name of the thing. You can tell me it's not simple. I know it's not simple. I've never known you to arrive at anything simple in your life. It is genuinely not simple," Dell said. "In ways that I can't." She stopped. Looked at the table. Looked at Ruthie. "I'm not ready to explain the full shape of it. I want you to know I'm not being evasive for no reason. There are pieces of it that I'm still another stop arriving at." Ruthie noted the word arriving. Dell chose words the way she chose wine, deliberately, from a working knowledge of what she had and what the occasion required. She did not use the word arriving accidentally.
Okay, Ruthie said.
Then I'll tell you what I know, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. She put down her fork. You have been happier in the last 6 weeks than I've seen you in years. Not easier. I'm not saying easier. You look actually like someone who hasn't slept quite enough and is thinking about several things at once and is carrying something heavy. But underneath that, in the way a person is underneath the circumstance they're in, you look more present, more like yourself. She paused. I don't know what the circumstances are, but whatever they are, she's done that. Dell was quiet for a long time. Outside the restaurant, the street did its December thing. Cold and particular, the kind of cold that had chosen you. A cart went past with the sound of wheels on cobblestone. A woman laughed somewhere, the open-windowed kind of laughter that Paris permitted in December, if you were brave enough to have the window open. She has, Dell said finally. Yes. Then whatever the complicated is, Ruthie said, picking up her fork again, you're going to figure it out. I'm not sure it can be figured out in the conventional way. No, Ruthie said, with the confident authority of a woman who had navigated several years of Etienne, who had been married and was now technically not married and was still somehow a constant presence in her living room. The important things rarely can. She ate her duck. Tell me when you're ready. I'll be here either way. Dell looked at her across the table with an expression that was, by Dell's standards, nearly unguarded. The expression of someone who was grateful for a thing and did not know precisely how to receive the gratitude, who accepted it the way she accepted most things she hadn't asked for, by not deflecting, which was its own form of receiving. I know, Dell said. They finished the meal. They talked about Etienne, which provided considerable material. They walked home in the cold through the narrow streets of Montmartre, their breath making small clouds that December swallowed without comment. At the corner of Rue Frocket they parted, Ruthie up toward her apartment, Dell down toward the club. Ruthie walked half a block before she turned around. Dell was already at the door to the building, key in hand, but she had paused before going in. She was standing in the lamplight on the wet stones, and she was looking up at the building's facade with an expression Ruthie could not fully read from half a block away in December dark, but she could read enough of it. She could read the quality of it, which was the quality of someone looking at something they had been living inside of and had just begun to understand the full dimensions of. Ruthie turned back around. She walked home. She thought, I don't know what the complicated is. She thought, Dell Beaumont has been alone by design for 15 years, and 6 weeks ago something changed, and she is not alone in the same way anymore, even if she's not explaining why. She thought, whatever the complicated is, it had better be worth it. She thought, finally, in the particular privacy of a December street where no one could hear her and she could be entirely honest, I just don't want her to still be alone in 10 years and call it freedom. She went home. She did not call Dell that evening. She thought about calling. She thought, Dell will tell me when she's ready, and she will be ready when she is, and pressing has never worked with Dell Beaumont in 15 years of trying, and what she needs now is not to be pushed, but to be known that someone is here. So Ruthie was here. She made herself tea and thought about the expression on Dell's face in the lamplight outside the building, that expression of looking at something and beginning to understand its dimensions, and she let herself feel, in the warm quiet of her kitchen, the particular satisfaction of a woman who loved her friend well enough to wait.
Chapter 14, Henri.
Finding Henri Voclain took 11 days and 3 layers of neighborhood knowledge. The first layer was Margot, who knew that Isabelle had had a brother but had not seen him in some years, not since the brief weeks of estate business in 1918 and 1919 when he had come to collect what there was to collect and had left again carrying it all in a single trunk. He had been young, she said, 20, perhaps 21, too young for the weight he was carrying, the particular weight of being the only one left who knew what was being lost. She knew he had remained in Paris because Isabelle had once mentioned him as working somewhere on the left bank.
She did not know more than this.
The second layer was a woman named Claudette, who ran the dry goods shop on the Rue de Martyrs and who had been, Margot informed Dell, a neighbor of the Voclain family before the war in a building near the Jardins du Palais. Claudette was 73 years old and had the memory of a woman who had spent her whole life paying attention to the people around her because the people around her were the city's best inventory. She knew Henri Voclain. She knew that he had moved after the war to an apartment in the 7th arrondissement and that he had worked for some years at an insurance firm on the Boulevard Saint-Germain. She knew this because his umbrella had been repaired by the same cobbler on the Rue de Rivoli that Claudette used, and the cobbler had mentioned it in the way that cobblers mention things, which was obliquely and with the satisfaction of someone who had placed a name on a face. The third layer was the cobbler, who confirmed the Boulevard Saint-Germain firm, who confirmed the name, who said with the mild pride of a man who remembered all his clients, Voclain.
Yes. Kvietman.
He tips well for a man who works in insurance. Dell wrote the letter that evening. She sat at her kitchen table with the December dark pressing at the window and the letter she had already written to Vera that week sitting stamped and ready to post, and she wrote a different kind of letter. Careful, precise, truthful in its framing and entirely honest about what she wanted, which was to speak with someone about his sister. She did not explain why. She said only that she lived in the building on the roof rocket where Isabelle Voclain had lived until 1918, that she had found some items belonging to the estate that she believed he might want to know about, and that she hoped he would consider meeting her for coffee at a place of his choosing. She sealed it and posted it and expected nothing. He did not respond. She wrote a second letter. Shorter, more direct. I am not trying to disturb what you have made peace with. I believe your sister left something in the building for a specific reason. I think you may already know what that reason is. She paused over this last sentence for a long time before leaving it in. Then she sent the letter. A week later, a reply arrived. It was brief. The handwriting was small and even, the handwriting of a man who wrote carefully and did not waste paper. The sentences were correct in their English with the slight over-precision of someone translating emotional weight into a foreign language one word at a time.
Madame Beaumont.
I don't know why you are asking about my sister. I have not spoken of her to anyone who did not already know her. I suppose I can meet you for coffee. There's a place on the Rue du Bac that is quiet. Tuesday at 3, if this suits. It suited. She went on Tuesday, which meant she arrived at the meeting having spent the morning in that particular state of preparation that was less about what she was going to say and more about the steadiness she would need to maintain while saying it. She arrived at the café on the Rue du Bac 7 minutes before 3. She found a table in the corner, as she always did. The chair against the wall, clear sight lines to the door. Old habits from Chicago, alive in Paris. Henri Voclain arrived at 3 exactly. He was 44. Isabelle had died in 1918, and he had been 37 at the time, which made the arithmetic clear. He was a compact, careful man with the look of someone who carried his history close to his body, who had decided at some point that the way to manage what he'd been given was to take up as little space as possible and be very precise in the space he did take. His coat was good and undemonstrative. His face had the particular quality of a person who had spent many years controlling his expression and had become, in the process, a man whose stillness was visible. You could see the effort of it, slight but present, the way you could see the effort of holding something heavy in the way a hand held rather than dropped it. He looked at Dell.
He sat down.
Madame Beaumont, he said. Monsieur Voclain. Thank you for coming. He ordered coffee with the economy of a man who knew what he wanted and did not deliberate over small decisions. They sat for a moment in the particular silence of two people who have agreed to a meeting and have arrived at the moment of beginning it and are each waiting to see who will begin. Dell began. She told him the factual sequence. She had taken the lease on the building 4 years ago. She had been aware of things remaining in the cellar but had not attended to them promptly. She had recently examined them and found a sealed envelope among them with a wax mark she had reason to believe was connected to the estate. She did not say yet what the mark was. She watched his face as she said this. His face was careful. It was the face of a man who was listening very precisely. There is a woman, Dell said, who has been appearing at my club since November. At closing time.
She stopped.
She had thought about how to phrase this and had decided, in the end, that phrasing it was the wrong approach. That the only approach was directness. Your neighbor Margot Foss described her. The description matched someone I had been seeing every Tuesday for 6 weeks. Henry's hands, which were folded on the table, went very still. I went to the cellar, Dell said. I found the envelope. I opened it. The letter inside was dated November 1918 and signed IV. She looked at him. I believe the woman appearing at my club is your sister, Monsieur Voclain. I understand this is not a conventional sentence. I am saying it anyway, because I think you already know it's possible. Henri did not speak. He looked at his coffee cup, then at the table. Then, with the slow deliberateness of a man who was moving through something he had been waiting to be on the other side of for a very long time, he looked at Dell. "Show me your wrist," he said. Dell rolled up her sleeve. Henri looked at the inside of her left wrist for a long time. He looked at it the way you looked at something you had been told about and were now verifying, with the focused, internal quality of a man doing accounting in his own chest. The seal was clearly visible in the cafe's afternoon light. The mark she had explained as pigment and coincidence for 32 years, the mark on the wax of the envelope in the cellar, the mark carved into the stone above the church door on the roof rocket. He looked at it for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He did not appear to be a man who cried easily or often. The wet in his eyes had the quality of something that had been stored a very long time under pressure and had found, in this moment, the narrow opening it needed. He blinked once. He set his cup down with a small, careful sound. "She told me," he said, "when she was dying. She was very ill by the end. The influenza was fast, but she had a day near the beginning when she was still herself. She made me sit with her. She said—" He stopped. His English, which had been precise and measured, was doing something different now. Moving more slowly, each word chosen not just for accuracy, but for weight, the weight of something he had been carrying alone for 7 years. She said, "Someone will come. A woman. She will have the mark on her wrist." She described it exactly as I see it on you. She said, "When she comes, don't be surprised. Help her if she'll let you." Dell did not speak. "I thought," Henri said, "in the years after. I thought it was the fever. Or I wanted to think so. It was easier. She had always had these certainties. About people. About what was coming. I had grown up with them, and I believed them, and then she was gone, and I had no one to believe them with, and it was easier to let them be the fever." He was quiet for a moment. "I put flowers on her grave every November. I did not stop thinking about the mark." Dell said, "She left things in the building. Letters. She said in the first letter that she left the feeling of the place deliberately. That she had put something into the walls." "Yes," Henri said. "She would have. She understood things about places. About how feeling moved through space and could be held there if you knew how." He paused.
She was an archivist.
"She understood preservation." "Tell me about her," Dell said. He looked at her. In his face, she could see the movement of something that had been kept in the interior place for a very long time and was trying to determine whether the exterior was safe enough to receive it. She held his gaze steadily, not pressing, simply present, the way she had learned to be present in rooms that needed a particular quality of stillness. "Not today," he said. "Not all of it today. He stopped. "I need to understand what this is first. What you are. What you want from this." "I want to know who she was," Dell said. "The whole of her. Not just what I can find in an envelope." Henri looked at her for a long time. "Why?" he said. The question was simple and carried everything. Dell felt it land with the specific weight of a question that had found the thing it was looking for. She could have given him the diplomatic answer, the sufficient answer, the answer that moved things forward without revealing too much of what was underneath. She was very good at that kind of answer. She had been giving it for 32 years. She gave him the true one instead. "Because she knew who I was before she knew me," she said. "And I'm only just beginning to understand what that means. And she deserves to be known fully by someone who is trying to understand it honestly." She paused. "And because she has been in that building since 1918 waiting for something to be completed, and I think the completion requires me to know her. All of her." Henri was very still. Then he nodded, once, the nod of a man who had made a decision that cost something small but was the right decision regardless. "Come back next week," he said. "I have things to tell you. I need to find some of them first. There are letters, a journal she kept, some papers she left with me for safekeeping." He looked at his hands. "I have been keeping them safe for 7 years. I suppose it is time to put them to their purpose." Dell said, "Thank you." Henri looked at her. "Don't thank me," he said, with the slight, dry precision of a man who had learned that gratitude, when directed at him for something his sister had done, felt misapplied. "Thank her. She arranged all of this." Dell walked home through the December streets with the particular feeling of a woman who had just confirmed that she was not imagining things. Not just confirmed, but had confirmation from the one living person who had watched the thing happen from the inside, who had sat at a dying woman's bedside and been given the description of a person who would arrive years later and had been carrying that description in his quiet, careful chest for 7 years since. The city moved around her. The butcher pulling in his awning, the children coming out of the school on the corner, the smell of chestnuts from the cart at the intersection. Ordinary Paris, indifferent and beautiful. She walked through it with the extraordinary weight of what she had just confirmed pressing against her sternum alongside the letter in her inside pocket, and she felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she was not moving away from something but toward it. She was in the middle of something that had been in motion since before she was born. She did not find this frightening. She found it, against all expectation and practical judgment, the most certain thing she had felt in years. Chapter 15. What she was. Henri talked across 2 more coffees on 2 more weeks, and what he gave Dell over those afternoons was not a summary or an account but a life. Isabelle whole, given the way you gave something you had been the last person to hold, with the careful attention of someone who understood that the giving was a form of safekeeping. He began with the early years. Isabelle had grown up in Lyon, the eldest of 2, in a household that was comfortable and conventional in all the ways that a household could be conventional, and that had nonetheless produced, in its eldest child, a person who fit the conventionality the way a shoe fit when it was the wrong size, present in it, moving in it, but never entirely at ease. She had been precise as a child, Henri said, had always noticed the detail others missed, had always had a quality of attention that the adults around her found either charming or unnerving, depending on what she was attending to. She had described a guest at a dinner party once, when she was 9 years old, with an accuracy so complete that the guest's wife had gone pale. Isabelle had not understood why. She had simply been seeing what was there. She had come to Paris at 21, which was the earliest she could manage the logistics of leaving and which was, Henri understood now, as long as she could stand to wait. She had come, ostensibly, to study. She had come, actually, because Paris had a word for what she was and Lyon did not, and she had understood this about herself at 16 and had spent 5 years in patient preparation for the distance. Paris had been. He paused here and searched for the right word with the deliberateness of a man for whom every word cost something. Formation, he said.
Formation.
The years in Paris before the war had been the years in which his sister had formed herself, had found the name she'd been looking for and worn it until it became indistinguishable from her skin, had found the work she was good at, the people she trusted, the particular underground of women and artists and exiles in which she had moved with the specific ease of someone who has finally found the room that was built for the shape they are. Dell listened. She listened with the quality of attention she had learned from Isabelle herself, the kind that did not direct or resolve, that simply received. She asked few questions. She let Henri give the story in the order he needed to give it, which was not always chronological and was not always comfortable for him, and which she did not rush. He told her about the gift, which was what he had always called it because he hadn't known what else to call it. Isabelle had always known things she shouldn't have known, had always had these moments of certainty about people and events that went past ordinary perception. She had not been frightened of it, he said, but she had been careful with it. She understood that the usefulness of seeing things clearly depended on not frightening the people you were trying to help. She had learned to offer what she saw in forms that could be received, a suggestion here, a gentle observation there, the occasional precise thing said to the right person at the right time. And then there was the woman she had visited on the Rue de Martyrs. He was not sure of the exact year. 1907, perhaps, or 1906. Isabelle had been in her early 20s, still new to Paris, still learning what her life here would be. She had gone to the woman on the recommendation of a friend who described her as a reader of palms who spoke in a register different from anyone they'd known. Isabelle had gone expecting the ordinary theater of such things, and had come back quieter than she'd left. She had told Henri, years later, what the woman had said, that there was a person coming, that the person was not yet of an age to understand themselves, that Isabelle would not live to meet them, that she should write it down anyway. Dell said nothing. She held the cup in both hands and did not speak, and Henri watched her with the careful attention of a man who was trying to understand what he was looking at, which was, she supposed, a woman receiving the information that her existence had been predicted to someone now dead, in a room in Paris on a street she had walked past without knowing, in a year before Dell Beaumont had been born. She wrote it down, Dell said. She wrote it down, Henri said. For 11 years.
From
1907 until she died. She kept a record of what she knew, or thought she knew. She was always careful about that distinction. She would not have said no's. She would have said, this is what I see. What she saw, over 11 years, she wrote down. He paused. I have some of it. Not all. Some she burned. She was precise about what should persist, and what should not. But some she gave me, and some is still in that building, I think. There are 2 letters, Dell said. I've read the first. The second was different, Henri said. She sealed it separately and made me promise not to touch it. She said, it's not for you to open. It's for her to open when she's ready. He looked at his coffee. I don't know what's in it. I kept the promise. Dell thought about the envelope in her cellar. The one that was heavier than it should be. The one she had picked up and set back down. The one she had been circling for weeks. She thought, there is a second letter. You are not ready for it yet. She was getting closer to ready. She asked about the archives. Henri was more at ease here. The years of Isabelle's working life, the institution on the Isle de la site where she had spent her days cataloging the records of a city that had always been making and losing and finding itself. The colleagues, the work. The years before the war when Paris had been itself, and the years during it when Paris had been something else, and Isabelle had continued, in the way of archivists, to treat the preservation of things as a form of resistance against the probability of loss. He talked about the women she had known, the underground of it, the particular geography of a city that offered language and space for what they were. He spoke of it carefully, the way he had always spoken of it, with the gravity of someone who understood what it had cost, and with the particular tenderness of a man who had loved his sister exactly as she was and had not made her explain herself. She had told him once, he said, that the greatest gift he had given her was never asking her to justify the name she had chosen. He had not understood at the time that it was a gift. He had thought it was simply the obvious response to someone he loved. Dell looked at him. She thought of Vera's kitchen table. She thought of Vera's voice. You cannot afford this. Not here. Not as a colored woman. Not in this life. She thought of what it would have been like to have had, instead, what Henri had offered his sister without knowing it was anything particular to offer. She put these thoughts in the interior place they belonged for now, and returned to Henri. He gave her the last of it over the second afternoon. The winter of 1918, the influenza arriving in November the way it arrived everywhere that year, fast and without consideration. Isabelle had been sick for 10 days. Henri had been with her for the last 4. She had been lucid for parts of it and not lucid for others, and the parts that were not lucid he did not discuss, because some things were private even now. The parts that were lucid were, he stopped. He looked at the table. She was not afraid, he said. That was the thing that he stopped again. She was not afraid. She was impatient, I think, is the closest word. Impatient the way you were impatient when you had done everything you needed to do and were simply waiting for the form to catch up with the substance of it. He looked at Dell. She said, tell her I knew. When she comes, tell her I knew she would come, and that I was glad I waited. Tell her the room is hers. Dell pressed her left hand flat against the table. The cafe around them was its ordinary Tuesday afternoon self, 2 other tables occupied, the proprietor behind the counter reading something, the street outside doing its December business. Ordinary Paris, unhurried. Dell sat in it with the feeling she had been carrying since the conversation with Margot, since the first letter, since Tuesday after Tuesday of Isabelle at the corner table, the feeling that she had arrived, finally, at the full dimensions of the thing she had been living inside without knowing its shape. This was the shape. A woman who had died at 31, in November, in the room above the club where Dell now ran a business 4 nights a week. who had spent 11 years writing down the description of a person she had never met, who had salted the room with the particular feeling of the late hour, the close-time honesty, the thing Dell had recognized when she walked in and had claimed as her own, who had told her brother, in the last days of her life, to tell the woman coming that she had known. She had known.
Dell thanked Henri.
She thanked him the way she thanked people for things that were too large for the word thank you, but for which no other word existed. Simply, directly, without elaborating it into something that would have been less honest by being more ornate. He nodded. He looked slightly relieved, she thought. The relief of a man who had been the last keeper of something important for a very long time and had finally found the person it belonged to. She walked home through the December afternoon, the light already going by 4 o'clock, the city doing its long winter dusk. She walked the whole distance from the Rue du Bac, which took 35 minutes, because she needed the time and the motion and the cold air and the particular company of a city that did not care what you were carrying as long as you kept moving. She went into the club. She did not go behind the bar. She did not perform the operational checks that began her evenings. She crossed the room directly to the corner table. Isabelle's table. She had been thinking of it as Isabelle's table since the first night, had been thinking of it as her own table long before she knew whose it was, and she sat down in the chair that was not hers. She sat in Isabelle's chair. The room was empty and quiet and cold, the late afternoon light coming in flat through the high windows.
No candles lit.
The chairs pushed in. The bar clean and still. No Clem, no guests, no music. Just the room in its neutral state, waiting to be inhabited. Dell sat in the chair and looked at the room. She thought about a woman in her mid-20s, newly arrived in Paris, sitting in a room in this building. Not the club, which hadn't been the club yet, but the space below the apartment, the cellar where the floor was stone, and the walls were cold, and the city above was just beginning to offer her the language she had been waiting for. Sitting in that room, writing down a description of a person she knew was coming. She thought, she spent 11 years doing that. She thought, I spent 32 years being the person she was describing, and I had no idea. She thought, she died before she could meet me, and she spent her last coherent hours telling her brother to pass a message along. Dell said, to the empty room, I'm sorry I took so long to get here. She did not know if Isabelle could hear her. The temperature in the room changed. Slightly, the degree or two of shift that happened at closing time, the quality of the air becoming the specific quality she had learned to recognize over 6 weeks of Tuesdays. It might have been the building's heating finding its evening rhythm. It might have been something else. Dell sat with the ambiguity.
She was getting better at that.
She sat at Isabelle's table in the empty room until the light through the high windows went from flat December gray to the particular dark blue of early evening, and the city outside settled into its nighttime register, and the room around her held its warmth with the patience of something that had been holding things for a long time and knew how. Then she stood and straightened the chair and went to light the candles and open the club. Tuesday was coming. Chapter 16. The seal burns differently now. She came on a Thursday. Dell had been in the middle of the accounts, the January tallies, which required more attention than the December ones because December always produced anomalies, the particular generosity of a month that made people order the second bottle and linger past the hour they had planned, and she had been at the bar with the ledger open and the lamp pulled close, and a glass of water she had been meaning to drink for an hour. She was not waiting for anything.
It was a Thursday.
Isabelle came on Tuesdays. The temperature shifted at the far end of the room. Dell looked up from the ledger. Isabelle was at the corner table. Dell marked her place in the accounts with a careful line. She put down the pen. She was aware, in the way she had become aware of things she used to explain away, of the seal on her wrist, not the steady warmth of a Tuesday evening, but something sharper, more present, the way a sound you had grown used to changed when the room around it changed. She looked at the mark on her wrist, and then she looked at Isabelle. Thursday, she said. Yes, Isabelle said. Dell came around the bar. She did not bring the champagne. She brought 2 glasses and the burgundy she kept for herself, which she poured at the table, and she sat down across from Isabelle with the ease of a woman who had been sitting in this chair for 2 months and had stopped performing any version of herself that was not the true one. Is something wrong? She said. Isabelle considered the question. No, she said, one beat after Dell expected it. I wanted to see you. Dell looked at her. She received this the way she had been learning to receive things from Isabelle, without deflection, without the automatic downward management she applied to most things directed at her. She let it sit between them in the candlelight and be what it was. All right, she said. They sat for a while in the quiet that had become, over 2 months of Tuesdays and one Thursday, the most honest kind of quiet Dell had in her life. The club was empty. She did not run the club on Thursdays, and the building around them was doing its late evening thing. The creak of the upstairs floor that was Margot's particular weight on the boards above the kitchen, the distant sound of the street, the settling of old stone in January cold. Dell had come to find these sounds companionable in a way she had not, in the years before, bothered to notice they were not. You spoke to Henri again last week, Isabelle said. It was not a question.
Yes.
He brought some papers. A journal. I know.
A pause.
How is he? Dell thought about this.
Careful, she said.
And then, toward the end of the afternoon, not careful. In the way of someone who has been careful about something for so long that not being careful about it feels like putting down a weight they'd forgotten they were carrying. She paused. He misses you. Isabelle was quiet. He has missed you every day for 7 years, Dell said. He just hasn't had anyone to say it to. She watched something move through Isabelle's face, not the composed surface, but beneath it, the thing the composure was holding. It was brief. Dell had come to understand the particular discipline of someone who had spent years being careful with what they showed because showing it had cost something in the world they had inhabited. The discipline had not left her. But in these evenings at the corner table, in the late candlelight with the room empty around them, Dell could sometimes see through it to the thing it was holding. I am glad he has you, Isabelle said quietly. Dell pressed her left hand flat against the table. The seal was burning steadily now. Not the low, patient warmth of the first weeks, but something more insistent, the way a fire burned when you had been feeding it carefully and it had finally taken. She had stopped trying to not notice it. She had stopped trying to explain it. It was simply present, the way Isabelle was present, the way the wanting she had spent 32 years managing was present. Everything she had filed under pending was now simply here, in this room, at this table, burning. I want to ask you something, she said. Isabelle looked at her, the gray-green eyes, steady. Why didn't you let yourself live more of it? Dell said. Your life. You were here. Paris, the people, the work you were good at. Henri said you moved through the city, like you belonged to it. But he also said, he didn't say it this way, but I could hear it underneath, that you spent a great deal of your time waiting. Not waiting the way people waited for things they expected to arrive on a reasonable schedule. Waiting the way you wait when you've been told something will happen and you don't know the shape of the interval. She looked at Isabelle. Was that its own loss? Knowing something was coming and not being able to stop orienting toward it. Isabelle was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That is, yes. I didn't always know how to be where I was when I was also watching for something ahead. She tilted her head slightly. I was better at it some years than others. I had years that were full.
People I loved.
Work I found meaningful. The city itself. A pause. And then there were years when the waiting was all I could feel, and everything else felt like filling time until the thing arrived. She looked at the candle. I think that was its own failure of imagination. I could not see far enough ahead to know what the waiting would cost. Dell said, It's the inverse of what I did. Isabelle looked at her. I buried the wanting, Dell said. You kept the wanting and buried the life alongside it. We both managed it wrong. The room was very still. Yes, Isabelle said. Though I think you are being harder on both of us than the evidence requires. I'm practical, Dell said. You are, Isabelle said. One beat. Practical about everything except what it costs you. Dell looked at her for a long moment. Tell me about being 19, Isabelle said. It was the first time Isabelle had asked her something directly, the first time she had named the thing rather than approaching it from the angle Dell had built her defenses to receive. Dell registered this. She looked at the table. She thought about the various ways she had told this story, to herself, in the accounting she did at odd hours, to Ruthie, lightly as biography, To no one, in the true version that had never left the interior room where she kept it. She told the true version. She told it in the order it had happened. The neighbor's apartment, the girl named Cora who laughed too easily and had no interest in consequences, the kitchen where the others were in the next room, and the 4-second kiss, and the walk down the stairs, and the specific precision of understanding what it meant about her. She told it the way it had actually felt, not as a wound, but as a clarity. The things she had always known about herself becoming, in that moment, the things she could no longer not know. She told Isabelle about the neighbor in the hall, about Vera's kitchen table and the coffee cup and the sound of the building in winter and the sentence, "You cannot afford this. Not here. Not as a colored woman. Not in this life." Isabelle listened the way she always listened, completely, without directing, without the slight anticipatory movement of a person preparing their response while you were still speaking. She listened as if Dell's words were the only thing happening in the world right now, which was, Dell had learned, both the gift and the discomfort of being truly heard. Did it work? Isabelle asked, when Dell had finished. The building on top of it. Dell looked at her. "It kept me safe," she said. "Mostly. That's not what I asked." Dell pressed her left hand flat against the bar's edge. The seal was burning. Not painfully, nothing in it communicated pain, but insistently, the particular insistence of something that had been patient for a long time and had decided that patience had served its purpose, and it was now time for something else.
"No," she said.
It didn't work. It just kept. Isabelle looked at her with those river-water eyes. "And Vera," she said, "did you ever tell her?" "No," Dell said. 7 years of letters and not one honest sentence about this.
She paused.
"I write to her about the weather and Ruthie and the wine merchant. I tell her I'm well. I tell her I have everything I need." She looked at the table. "It's the truest lie I know how to tell," Isabelle said, "but you don't have everything you need." It was not a question. Dell looked up. Isabelle was watching her, with the particular quality she brought to the precise thing, the one that arrived one beat after you expected it and landed exactly where you were most offended. "No," Dell said. "I don't." The word sat in the room. It was the first time she had said it clearly, without negotiation, without the brackets of a reasonable explanation. She did not have everything she needed. She had built a beautiful life with no room in it for wanting, and the wanting had not, in 32 years, agreed to be filed under pending and stay there. It had simply moved to the interior where she couldn't reach it, and built a room of its own, and been present in the negative space of every decision she had made since Vera's kitchen table. She had needed something she had refused to let herself have.
She was looking at it now.
Isabelle did not speak. She did not say the gentle or the devastating thing, which was itself a form of precision. She knew when silence was the more exact instrument. She sat across the table with the quality of stillness that was not absence but the opposite, the stillness of a presence, so complete it didn't need to fill the space because it already occupied it entirely. Dell sat in it. She sat in the wanting, without the lid. She did not explain it away. She did not assess it or file it or move to the next operational item. She simply sat at a corner table at 11 o'clock on a Thursday in January with a glass of wine, and a woman who had been dead for 7 years, and the seal on her wrist burning like something that had finally been given air, and she let the room be what it was. The candle between them burned very straight. "Same time next week," Dell said eventually. And then, because it was now true, and she had arrived at the point where she said true things, or Thursday, whichever you can manage. Something moved across Isabelle's face that was not amusement, but lived near it. "I'll see what I can do," she said. Dell smiled. It was the specific smile she gave to very few things, the one that came from the part of her she kept for her own company, not the warm professional smile she used in the room, but the private one, the one that happened when something landed exactly right. Isabelle looked at her with an expression Dell did not have the vocabulary for yet, but which she would, she thought, have time to learn. Then the candle at the table guttered once. Just once. The first time any candle had guttered in Isabelle's presence, and when the flame steadied, the corner table was empty. Dell sat for a moment. She put her hand flat on the table where Isabelle's hands had rested, on the warm wood of it, and the seal on her wrist was burning the way it burned now, not with the patience of something waiting, but with the insistence of something that had been given what it needed and was asking, simply and directly, for more. She left her hand on the table for a while. Then she went back to the accounts, which she finished by midnight, and went upstairs, and lay in the dark of her apartment with Paris cold at the window and something warm at the center of her chest, and did not explain it away. Chapter 17. Ruthie Asks. Ruthie had decided, over the course of January, that she had been patient long enough. She had given Dell December. December was a month that asked things of people. The cold, the year's accounting, the particular weight of a season that organized itself around warmth and belonging, and therefore had a way of making the absence of those things feel pointed. She had given Dell December because she could see that Dell was in the middle of something, was moving through something with the forward momentum of a woman who could not stop and process it without losing the thread of it, and Ruthie understood this mode in her friend well enough to leave her alone inside it. But it was now the third week of January, and Dell had been in the middle of something since November, and Ruthie had, objectively, run out of patience. She invited Dell to dinner. Dell came on a Friday, which was a club night, and therefore meant she would leave early, which Ruthie considered and then decided was acceptable because the conversation she needed to have would not take long. It would take exactly as long as Dell's defenses held, and then it would be brief and clear, and then Dell would go back to the club and Ruthie would do the dishes and feel the specific satisfaction of a woman who had said the necessary thing. She made the duck because she knew Dell liked it and because she believed in the strategic deployment of good food. They ate. They talked. Etienne, who had achieved a new level of inconvenience by deciding to take an engagement at a concert hall in Lyon for the spring, and had communicated this to Ruthie approximately 48 hours before he intended to leave, which she described with the particular controlled exasperation of a woman who had ceased to be surprised by him and had not yet decided what to do with that. Dell listened with the genuine attention she gave to Ruthie's life, which was one of the things Ruthie valued about her. Dell was not a performative listener. She was interested. She remembered. She asked the follow-up question that proved she had been paying attention even when you assumed she was occupied elsewhere. They finished the duck. Ruthie cleared the plates. She poured the second glass of wine and sat back down and looked at Dell across the table. Dell looked back with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for something and had decided to receive it rather than preempt it. "Dell," Ruthie said. "Who is she?" It was not phrased as a question. This was deliberate. Dell was quiet for a moment. Not the management Dell quiet. Not the pause before a strategic answer. The pause of a woman who had been carrying something for 2 months and had been asked, directly, to put it on the table. "Her name is Isabelle," she said. Ruthie waited. "She is connected to the building," Dell said. "It's history. She lived there. Before me." She looked at her wine glass. "She's been appearing. At closing time. Since November." "Appearing," Ruthie said. "Yes." "A beat." Ruthie turned the word over the way she turned things over when they contained more than their surface suggested. "Appearing," she said again. "Not arriving. Not coming by." "No," Dell said. Ruthie looked at her. Dell looked back. "Isabelle Voclain," Dell said. "She died in 1918. Influenza. She was 31 years old, and she had been living in what is now my apartment and the space that is now the club, and she died there, and she—" Dell stopped. "She didn't leave. She left letters in the cellar instead. Letters she addressed to whoever came next. To me, though she didn't know my name yet when she wrote them." She paused. "The second letter she wrote in 1907, 11 years before she died, and in it she described me. My posture. The way I hold myself when I think no one is watching. The fact that I came from somewhere that had no word for what I am, and so I built a life over the wanting instead of through it." "The dining room was very quiet," Ruthie said, "and she has been coming to your club every Tuesday since November. Sometimes other nights now. And you have been sitting across from her at the corner table at closing time." "Yes." "And you have been falling in love with her." Dell opened her mouth. "Don't," Ruthie said, not unkindly. "Don't tell me it isn't simple. I know it isn't simple. The woman is dead, Dell. I understand that it isn't simple. I am asking you a specific question, and I would like the specific answer. Dell closed her mouth. She looked at the wine glass. She looked at the table. She looked at Ruthie. The 15 years of her, the full-throated love of a woman who had turned up in Dell's life and retroactively made everything before her seem sparsely populated, who had been arriving with coffee and opinions since 1910 and had never once required Dell to be other than she was. Yes, Dell said. Ruthie let out a breath. All right, she said. Ruthie. All right, Ruthie said again, steadier. I'm not alarmed. I need a moment. She put her wine down. She folded her hands. She looked at Dell with the expression of a woman who was doing the emotional mathematics of a situation that had just become significantly more complicated than she had estimated, and was doing this mathematics with the speed and composure that 15 years of navigating complex situations with Dell had developed. She's good to you. Yes. And you can speak to her. She's present. She's not just She's entirely present, Dell said, with the quiet certainty of someone who had been present with her every Tuesday for 2 months. More present than most living people I've known. Ruthie was quiet for a moment. The letters, she said. She described you. In 1907. In detail. Before you were born. I was born in 1893, Dell said. She wrote the letter in 1907. I was 14 years old. And she knew you were coming. She knew someone was coming. She described the shape of them. Dell paused. She almost had my name. She wrote. I can almost hear it. Ruthie pressed her lips together. It was the expression she made when something moved her, and she was deciding whether to let it show. Dell, she said. I know. That's extraordinary. I know. That's the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever said to me in a dinner conversation, and I include the time Etienne told me he had briefly been engaged to a countess. Ruthie picked up her wine. She drank. She set it back down. And the building, the club. She put the feeling into the walls, the late-hour thing, the honesty after midnight. Yes. She did it deliberately. She was an archivist. She understood preservation. Ruthie looked at her across the table. And you recognized it when you walked in. I signed the lease the same day. Something moved across Ruthie's face. You told me you signed it for the price and the light. I know what I told you. Ruthie absorbed this. All right, she said for the third time, and this time it had a different quality. The quality of a woman who had arrived at the full dimensions of what she was looking at and had decided that the only honest response was to stop adding brackets to her acceptance. All right. You are in love with a woman who has been dead for 7 years, who knew you were coming before you arrived, who put your club in the walls of her building so you would have something to find. And she comes at closing time. Every Tuesday, Dell said. And sometimes Thursday. And you sit across from her. Yes. And you, what does it feel like, being with her? Dell looked at the table. She was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was not managing her answer, but actually looking for it. The inward stillness of a woman consulting the true record rather than the edited one. Like being read accurately, she said, by someone who asks nothing invasive. Someone who already knows the version of you that exists before you start adjusting for the room. She paused. I have never felt that from anyone. Not in 32 years. Ruthie looked at her for a long time. You're in love with her, she said again. But this time it was not a question she was pressing Dell to confirm. It was something else, the particular quality of naming a thing you have just understood the full weight of. The way you named a thing when you had moved from knowing it abstractly to knowing it completely. Yes, Dell said. And she's dead. Yes. And you cannot. There's no way to. No, Dell said. There isn't. A pause. I know what it is. I'm not pretending there's a resolution that doesn't exist. I know what it is and what it isn't, and I have made my peace with both. Ruthie looked at her. Have you, she said. Dell met her eyes. I'm working on it, she said, with the precise honesty of a woman who had decided to stop telling Ruthie things that were true enough. Ruthie nodded. She stood up. She collected the wine glasses with the economy of movement that meant she was thinking hard about something else. She stood at the counter for a moment with her back to the room, and then she turned around and she said, Dell, I need you to hear me say something, and I need you to let me finish it before you respond. All right. I have watched you manage yourself for 4 years. I have watched you be the most competent person in every room you have entered, and I have watched the competence cost you things that the room never got to see, and I have loved you through all of it, and I have been patient about it, because I understood where it came from, and I understood why you needed it. She looked at Dell directly. But I need you to know, whatever this is, whatever the shape of it, and whatever the resolution or lack of resolution, I need you to know that you deserve to have wanted something this completely. You have always deserved that. The fact that it arrived in this form does not make the wanting less real or less worth having. Do you hear me? Dell looked at her. She heard her. She heard her the way she heard very few things. Not with the processing function, not with the part of her that immediately assessed and categorized and filed, but with the part that was simply present and receiving, the part she rarely let operate without the other parts running interference. She heard her, and it cost something. Yes, she said. Ruthie sat back down. Good, she said, with the briskness of a woman who had said the necessary thing, and was ready to move forward. Now tell me what you're going to do. I'm going to find the second letter, Dell said. I know it's there. I know what it contains, in outline from what Henri told me. She described me in it in detail, more detail than the first. When I read it, I think something will complete. I don't know what completion looks like. I know I'm not ready for it yet.
She paused.
I'm close. How close? Close, Dell said. Ruthie looked at her for a moment. Then she said, You know what I think is happening? I think you're ready. I think you've been ready for several weeks. I think the story you're telling yourself about not being ready is the last piece of the wall. Dell looked at the table. She did not answer. She did not answer because Ruthie was probably right and she had not decided yet what to do with that probability, and she was not going to perform a decision she hadn't made in front of someone who would hold her to it. Thursday, Ruthie said, the brisk tone again. I'm going to the gallery opening on the Rue de la Paix Thursday evening. You should come. Get out of the club. Look at some paintings. Let someone else be the person running the room for 4 hours. I'll think about it. Come, Ruthie said. It was not a suggestion. Dell said she would think about it, which Ruthie correctly interpreted as a yes that required the dignity of a brief delay, and accepted accordingly. She left at 9:30 to open the club. She went downstairs and through the familiar ritual and stood at the bar, and Clem played the slow progression, which had long since become a finished piece though Clem had not officially declared it finished, and the regulars came and stayed and went, and the club did what the club did, warm and full and running on its own rhythm. At midnight, the last guests gone, Clem packing up for the night, Dell stood behind the bar and looked at the corner table. She had not cleaned anything. She noticed this the way Ruthie had told her she would notice it, as information. She had not, in 2 months of Tuesdays and 1 Thursday and the accumulated weight of everything she had learned and felt and stopped pretending she wasn't feeling, moved to clean a single thing that didn't need cleaning tonight. She had simply been present, in the room, at the bar, with the wanting intact and the management for this one night set aside. She stood in it. She stood in it until Clem had gone, and the room was quiet, and the candles were burning low, and she thought about what Ruthie had said. You're ready. The story you're telling yourself about not being ready is the last piece of the wall. She looked at the corner table. She thought, tomorrow. She went upstairs.
She did not sleep for some time.
Chapter 18. All is lost. February arrived with the particular quality of a month that had no patience for ambiguity. The city stripped itself of decoration. The light was thin and flat and came and went at hours that made no promises about tomorrow. The stone on the streets was the color of cold. Dell did not mind February. She had always found it honest. On the first Tuesday of February, Isabelle did not come. Dell had set the corner table in the usual way. She had sent Clem home at 11. The gesture they had arrived at without discussing it, Clem departing with the particular tact of someone who understood the shape of what was being given space for, and she had sat at the bar with the accounts she was not working on and waited with the patience she had developed over 3 months of Tuesdays. The temperature at the far end of the room did not shift. The candle on the corner table burned in ordinary air and flickered when the draft came through the window the way candles were supposed to flicker. The room held its normal Tuesday quiet, which was not the same quiet as the Tuesday quiet with Isabelle in it, though she would not have known the difference 3 months ago. She waited until 3 in the morning. Then she locked the till and put out the candles and went upstairs. She did not sleep well. She told herself it meant nothing. She had told herself this with the thoroughness of someone who had spent a great deal of time being thorough about not saying things to themselves, and it was, by the standards of her previous self-management, not a convincing performance. She knew it wasn't convincing. She performed it anyway for the company of it. Wednesday. She worked. The supply order. The correspondence about the Thursday kitchen. A letter to Vera that she sat down to write and found she could not make the usual sentences come, the warm and dishonest ones, and so she folded the paper back into the drawer and told herself she would try again Thursday. She did not try again Thursday. On Thursday evening Isabelle came. Dell was in the cellar when the temperature shifted. She had been down here looking at the trunk, the papers, the things Henri had not taken when he cleared the estate, giving the second envelope its familiar look of patient certainty from the top of the trunk where she had put it back after the first letter. She had been standing near it with her hands at her sides and the lamp held up and the knowledge, present and steady, that she was almost ready and that almost had been carrying a great deal of weight for several weeks. She felt the shift and went upstairs. Isabelle was at the corner table. Dell crossed the room and sat down and looked at her. Something was different. She could not have described it in the specific terms she would have preferred. It was not visible in the usual way. Isabelle looked as she always looked. The dark hair, the good dress, the beauty mark, the gray-green eyes. But there was a quality to the edges of her that had changed. Not less present. Isabelle was present, was entirely here, was looking at Dell with the full attention she always brought. But the definition of her, the particular way she occupied the candlelight, was slightly different. Slightly softer at the periphery. As though the room around her was beginning, in some imperceptible degree, to show through. Dell said, "What's happening?" Isabelle looked at her. She did not deflect, did not modulate, did not reach for the composure she usually wore as simply as she wore the dress. She said, with the precision that now cost her something visible, "I think I'm running out of time." The words landed in Dell's chest with a weight she had not prepared for, which meant she had been preparing for something else. The version of this that was abstract and someday, and the concern you carried about a thing that might be true and hadn't arrived yet. This was the arrived version. This was the thing having come. "How long?" Dell said. "I don't know. I don't have. I can't see my own edges the way I can see other things." She paused. "I know the tether is thinning. I can feel it the way you feel a thread that is still holding but has fewer fibers than it did." She looked at Dell steadily. "I know the letters are connected to whatever is keeping me here. And I know there is something I was meant to complete. Something that hasn't completed yet." Dell said, "The second letter." "Yes. I haven't opened it." "I know. I'm close," Dell said. I know I'm close. I didn't know there was a schedule." "Neither did I," Isabelle said, and in her voice was the specific thing Dell had heard in it only once or twice before, the thing underneath the composure, the thing she did not often let the surface carry. Not fear. Something more like the old impatience Henri had described, the impatience of someone who had done everything they could do and was waiting for the form to catch up with the substance.
"I'm sorry."
"I should have said something sooner. I thought I had more time." "Don't apologize," Dell said.
Dell.
"Don't." She said it quietly, not harshly. "You have nothing to apologize to me for. You have been here 7 years waiting for a person you had no guarantee was coming. You sat in this room alone for 7 years, and then I arrived, and you gave me 3 months to catch up to what you already knew. You do not owe me an apology for not providing a schedule." Isabelle looked at her. There was a long silence. Not the comfortable silence of their good evenings, but a different quality. The silence of two people who had arrived at a precipice and were standing in it together, and neither of them had words adequate to the shape of it. "What happens?" Dell said. "If I open the letter and if it completes." "I don't know exactly," Isabelle said. I know the tether will go. I know the seal will change.
She paused.
I believe I will. Rest. I believe that is the right word. Not gone. Not nothing. But no longer here in this form. She looked at Dell with the gray-green eyes, steady and direct. I don't want you to think of it as loss. I want you to think of it as completion. It was always going to end this way. The question was only when. Dell looked at her. She thought, I have known since November that this was how it would end. She is a ghost. The end of a ghost story is the ghost's release. I have known this. I have known it, and I have been choosing not to look at it directly, because looking at it directly made it real in the way that things became real when you acknowledged them. She looked at it directly. I'll read the letter, she said. Not tonight, Isabelle said. You'll know when it's time. You've always known when it was time. You've simply been negotiating with yourself about whether to go. She tilted her head. Stop negotiating. Dell looked at her for a long moment. All right, she said. They sat together for another hour. They did not talk about the tether or the timeline. Dell asked about the archives where Isabelle had worked. Henri had mentioned a particular collection she had been cataloging in 1917, a set of household records from the 17th century that had been found in the wall of a building near the Isle St. Louis during repairs, and Isabelle talked about it with the animation she brought to the things she had loved, the specific pleasure of a woman who had found work that suited the particular shape of her mind, and had done it well. Dell listened. She asked questions. She listened to the answers. She looked at Isabelle, and she memorized her. She did it the way she memorized things she intended to keep, not deliberately, not with a mechanical effort of rote memory, but with the full quality of attention she gave to the things that mattered. The precise tilt of the head. The one-beat delay before the truest sentences. The way the hands folded on the table when she was choosing her words. The gray-green of the eyes in candlelight, variable, like river water. She memorized everything. When Isabelle was gone, the table empty, the chair pushed in with its usual care, the candle burning straight in ordinary air, Dell sat at the bar alone and did not move for a long time. She thought, the clock is running. She thought, the second letter has been in the cellar for 7 years. She went downstairs. She stood in the cellar with the lamp in her hand and looked at the envelope on top of the trunk. She picked it up. It was heavier than the first had been. Not by much. A few sheets of additional paper, perhaps, or the weight of something written at greater length. But it was distinctly heavier, and she registered this as the thing she had been told to register. The letter she was ready for would feel different in her hands. She held it. The seal on her wrist was burning. Not the steady warmth of Tuesday evenings, not the insistent burn of January Thursday, but something different again. Dimmer. The way a coal burned when it was giving its last heat, the way a flame burned in the moment before it went out, concentrated and present, and aware of its own limit. She held the letter, and she breathed. She thought, not tonight. Not in the cellar at 2 a.m, not like this. She thought, but soon. The negotiation is over. Ruthie said so, and Isabelle said so, and the seal on her wrist was saying so in the language of a thing with a finite amount of time. She put the envelope in the inside pocket of her jacket, close to her sternum. She carried it upstairs. She sat at the bar for a long time in the empty club, with the letter against her chest and the candles burnt to nothing and the city outside pressing its February dark against the windows, and she thought about Isabelle describing the shape of her in 1907 and dying in 1918 still waiting, and she thought about the kind of patience that required, and she thought, the least I can do is be ready. She went upstairs. She sat at the kitchen table and did not write the letter to Vera. She looked at the blank paper. She thought, there is a letter I have been not writing for 7 years. There is a letter I have been not writing since I was 19 years old, and Vera sat me down at a table not unlike this one. There is a letter that is the true version of every performed letter I have sent north across the ocean. She thought, before I read Isabelle's letter, I need to write my own. She left the paper on the table. She went to bed. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow was the word she had been using for some time, but this time she meant it. Chapter 19. Dear Vera, here is the truth. She closed the club at midnight. The last guests, a couple she recognized, Regulars from the ninth who came on Wednesdays for the music and stayed for the conversation thanked her at the door with the warmth of people who had had a good evening and wanted her to know it. Dell thanked them in return. She meant it. She had meant every good evening they had given the room over the years, the accumulated evenings of the club, which was the thing she had built and which had always been more than the thing it looked like from the outside. She stood at the closed door for a moment. Then she went back to the room. Clem was finishing the last phrase of the night. The slow piece that had been unresolved for months and was now resolved had become something finished and inevitable, the way things became when they arrived at where they were going. They played it through to the end. They sat with their hands in their lap for a moment. Then they closed the piano. "Good night, Clem," Dell said. Clem looked at her. The look they gave her sometimes, the one that held more than it released. "You all right?" they said. "Yes," Dell said. And then, because it was Clem and Clem deserved the true version, "I'm going to be." Clem nodded. They put on their coat. They went home without making it an event. Dell locked the door behind them. She did the closing operation slowly. Glasses to the kitchen. Chairs straightened. The till counted. The figure entered in the ledger with the same careful hand she had used every night for 4 years. The kitchen banked. The lamps dimmed to the last one, the one at the end of the bar, which she always left until the end. She pulled the blank paper from the kitchen drawer. She sat at the bar with it, and the lamp, and the pen she always used for correspondence, and the letter from Isabelle's inside pocket where she had been carrying it since Thursday, and she sat for a moment looking at the empty page. It was 4 a.m. The city outside was doing its indifferent Paris thing, carrying on the particular Paris version of 3 a.m, the late delivery carts and the night workers and the city's ceaseless, unconscious life. She could hear it faintly through the old walls. Paris had always been good company at this hour. It asked nothing of her except to be in it. She picked up the pen. "Dear Vera," she wrote.
She stopped.
She had begun letters this way for 7 years, 280 or so times, give or take the weeks she had written twice and the months she had been late and the specific winter of 1922 when she had lost a week to influenza and had not been capable of letters at all. She knew the shape of the sentence. She had learned it so well it had become reflex, the pen finding it without her full attention required. She looked at what she had written.
Dear Vera.
She had been writing to Vera all her life. Had been performing the edited version of herself for Vera's kitchen table since she was old enough to understand the editing was necessary. Had sent the performed version across the ocean for 7 years and had received in return the warm, practical letters from Chicago, the news of the neighborhood, the recipes and the opinions and the love that was entirely real and entirely within the specific limits of what Vera could see. She had never written a single honest sentence about what she was. About the wanting she had spent 13 years building a life over. About Paris, which had offered her language and space and the company of people who did not require her to be small, and which she had been inhabiting for 7 years at a careful angle, accepting what she could accept and declining the rest. She had never written about Isabelle. She began, "I have been writing to you every 2 or 3 weeks for 7 years. I want you to know that these letters have been true in the ways I knew how to make them true. I told you about the weather and Ruthie and the wine merchant and the club's numbers and the things Margot said about the drains. All of that is true. I'm not writing to tell you it wasn't. I am writing to tell you what I left out." She wrote for a long time. She wrote about being 19, not the version she had carried as biography, smoothed by retelling, but the true version. The neighbor's apartment and the 4-second kiss and the walk down the stairs and the specific clarity of understanding, and then Vera's kitchen table and Vera's voice and the sentence she had taken into herself and built over. She did not write about this to accuse Vera. She did not write it with anger because she had no anger. She had thought, in the years when she was working it out, that she might have anger about it eventually, and she had waited for it to arrive, and it had not. What had arrived instead, in the years of patient accounting, was something more complicated and more accurate. She understood why Vera had said what she said, and she understood that it had been said from love, and she understood that the love was real, and the fear was real, and the conditions attached to both were real. And she understood that understanding all of this was not the same as agreeing to go on building a life inside those conditions forever. She wrote this. She wrote, I have been so careful for so long that I forgot careful and free are not the same thing. You taught me that careful was the only kind of freedom available to women like me, and you were right about a great deal. You were right about the world you knew and the costs it charged, and the way desire could be used against you if you let it show. You were right, and you loved me, and those two things were always true at the same time. I am not writing to say they weren't. She wrote, I think you loved me as well as you knew how, and what you knew how to do was keep me small enough to survive. I don't think that was wrong. I think it stopped being enough a long time ago, and I am only now saying so. She wrote, I have been in Paris for 7 years, and in that time I have made something real. The club is real. Ruthie is real. The life I have made here answers to me in the way I always wanted a life to answer. You would like Paris, I think, if you ever came. You would be annoyed by the language barrier for approximately 3 days, and then you would arrive at functional French through the force of your personality, which has never required a shared grammar to operate. She stopped. She looked at what she had written. She looked at it for a long time. Then she wrote, There is something else I need to tell you. I met someone. She is not alive, which is a complicated thing to explain in a letter, but it is the truest way I know to put it. She died in 1918, before I arrived here, and she left something in the walls of this building for me to find, and she has been appearing at closing time since November, and I have been sitting across from her at a corner table every Tuesday, and falling in love with her in the specific way I have always been afraid to fall in love. Completely, without a safety margin, without the architecture of not wanting I have been maintaining since I was 19 years old. She wrote, I know this sounds impossible. I want you to know that I am telling you anyway because you deserve the true version of my life after 7 years of the edited one, and because she is the most real person I have ever known, and the fact that she is not living does not change the realness of what passed between us. She wrote, I am going to read her letter tonight. She wrote it in 1907, before I was old enough to be who she was describing. She has been waiting all this time, and I have been arriving in my own slow way. And tonight is the night I stop arriving and arrive. She put down the pen. She sat for a moment with the letter in front of her. 3 pages, 4. The handwriting slightly less even than she would have preferred because she had not been writing it for evenness. She read it back. She read it all the way through once. She did not change anything. She did not fold it. She was not certain she would send it. She left it on the bar, waited with the pen, and she reached into her inside pocket, and she took out Isabelle's envelope. She held it in both hands. The seal on her wrist was dim and low, the coal at the end of its long burning, the flame at the edge of its light. She looked at the mark on her wrist, and she looked at the mark on the envelope, and she breathed once, evenly, the way she breathed before anything that mattered. She thought about Isabelle at 31, dying in November 1918, telling Henri, someone will come. She thought about Isabelle at 19, 20, 25, moving through Paris and knowing something was coming and not knowing the shape of the interval, the impatience of a woman with a long waiting ahead of her and no guarantee of how it would end. She thought, she did everything she could do, and then she died still waiting and called it worth it. She thought, the least I can do is be ready. She thought, I am ready. She held the envelope in her hands. Outside, Paris carried on. She broke the seal. Chapter 20. The second letter. The second letter was smaller. Dell almost missed it entirely. It had been folded into the lining of the first envelope, tucked so flat against the paper that it felt like nothing more than a thickening, a ghost of extra weight she had explained away as age and damp. She had been explaining things away for 2 years. It was March. The club was closed for the afternoon, and the light coming through the high windows was the particular gold of early Paris spring, not warm yet, but promising. Dell sat at the bar with a glass of water she hadn't touched, and the envelope in her hands, and the feeling she'd been carrying since November, that she was circling something she didn't have a name for yet. She unfolded the second letter slowly. The handwriting was different, older. The ink had gone the color of weak tea, and in 2 places the paper had worn almost through, as if someone had read it many times, or carried it pressed against something warm for a very long while. The date at the top was 1907. Isabelle had died in 1918. Dell's hands went still. To whoever holds this second. I know that sounds like a beginning, but it isn't. This is the end of a very long conversation I've been having with myself since I was 19 years old and understood, suddenly, that I was going to love someone I had not yet met. I am not writing to frighten you. I am writing because I was told to by a woman on the Rue de Martyrs who read palms and spoke in a register I've never heard from anyone since, and who told me that the person I was waiting for would not arrive in my lifetime. She said, "Write it down anyway. She will need to know she was already known. I don't know your name. I've tried to see it for 11 years, and it stays just past the edge of what I can reach, like a word in a language I almost speak. I know what you look like in a certain light. I know how you hold yourself when you think no one is watching. Careful, like someone who learned young that being seen costs something. I know you came from somewhere that didn't have a word for what you are, so you built yourself a whole life first and hoped the wanting would quiet down if you gave it nothing to eat. I know it didn't. I know you found my first letter, and I know what it cost you to read it. I know you've been standing in this room at closing time trying to figure out if you invented me, or if I invented you, or if it matters. It doesn't matter. Here is what matters. I spent 31 years trying to describe you to people who couldn't see what I saw, and I died before I got to meet you, and I would do it again. Every year of waiting. Every failed attempt to sketch the shape of you on paper. Every night I sat in this room. Before it was yours, before it was anyone's, when it was just a cellar and a pipe and a city that didn't know what to do with me either, and thought about the person coming. I left you the club on purpose. Not the building. The building is a building. I mean the feeling, the late hour, the empty glasses, the kind of honesty that only lives after midnight. I salted it into the walls. I am sorry if that is an unusual inheritance. I could not think of a better one. You will want to ask me things I cannot answer from here, whether I was afraid, whether it hurt, whether I am anywhere still. I don't know how to reach you with answers, only with this paper and 11 years of patient certainty. What I can tell you is this. You are worth the waiting. You are worth the not knowing. You are worth every year I spent in a city that called me by the wrong name until I found one that fit, and every room I walked into alone, and every song I heard that felt like a message from someone I hadn't met yet. I want you to go dancing. Not for me. For you. I want you to let someone see you the way you let yourself be seen in the dark at closing time. I want you to understand that wanting is not a weakness you've been managing. It's the most precise thing about you. The seal will go quiet after you read this. That's not loss. That's completion. I knew you would come. I knew you would be worth knowing. Isabelle. P.S. Your name is Dell. I can almost hear it. Dell sat with the letter for a long time. The light in the room shifted from morning gold to the flatter white of afternoon. Someone knocked on the door at some point, a delivery, or a neighbor, or the world. And she didn't move. The water in her glass went room temperature, and then forgot to matter. She had come to Paris with $40 and a borrowed tuxedo and the private knowledge that she liked women in a way that had no safe name, and she had spent 7 years making sure that knowledge stayed private, stayed manageable, stayed hers in the way that secret things are yours. Fully, completely, and entirely alone. She read the letter a second time. I knew you would come. She had not been found by accident. She had not wandered into the right city and the right cellar and the right inheritance by the random grace of movement. Isabelle had sat in this room, this exact room, these same stones, and described her. Had written her name in the dark 11 years before Dell was old enough to understand what she was. She thought about the first night Isabelle had appeared. The way Dell had decided, reasonably, efficiently, that she was tired and the champagne was making her imagine things. The weeks of not asking. The architecture of not wanting she had built so carefully that she had stopped being able to see the wanting underneath it. You built yourself a whole life first, and hoped the wanting would quiet down if you gave it nothing to eat. Dell pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. Outside, Paris was doing what Paris did. Carrying on, indifferent and beautiful, full of people who were hungry and lonely and alive and arguing about nothing important and buying bread and falling in love on bridges. She thought. Isabelle stood in this room and described my face. She thought. Isabelle died before she could meet me and wrote me a letter anyway. She thought, I have been choosing safety over wanting for so long, I forgot they were different choices. The seal on her wrist, not a tattoo, not a birthmark, something in between, something she had spent 32 years explaining as a coincidence of pigment, went warm, then quiet, then simply part of her skin, the way a scar eventually becomes just texture and stops being an event. Completion, Isabelle had written. Dell folded both letters together. She held them for a moment. The weight of 11 years of waiting plus 7 years of arriving plus however long it takes a woman to understand that she was always worth the effort of knowing. And then she put them in the inside pocket of her jacket, close to her sternum, where she had always kept the things that mattered most. She stood up. She put on her hat. She looked at the club, the bar, the tables, the corner table with its 2 chairs and its candlestick, the room that had been built by someone who loved her before they knew her and had trusted her to find it and know what to do with it. She had known. She had always known from the day she signed the lease. She looked at it for a moment. Then she walked out of the club into the afternoon, into the pale spring light, into a city that had always been full of people who knew what they were and had come here to be it openly, and she thought, I have not been that brave yet. She thought, I could be. She thought. Isabelle waited 31 years and died still waiting, and called it worth it. She thought, the least I can do is go dancing. She walked. Chapter 21. The Left Bank at Midnight. She had been avoiding the place on the left bank for 4 months. She knew about it the way she knew about most things in the city, through the accumulated intelligence of running a room that attracted people who knew other rooms. A woman at table 6 on a Friday in November had mentioned it to her companion with the particular warmth of a recommendation made to someone who would understand why it mattered. A club on the Rue de la Harpe, underground, reached through a door that did not announce itself, where the music was good and the company was the right kind. Dell had noted it the way she noted establishments of its type, professionally, with the mild curiosity of someone who understood the geography of such places and maintained a mental map of them. She had not gone. She had told herself she was busy. She had told herself Fridays were full, Saturdays busier, Sundays her only rest, and not to be surrendered to excursions. She had told herself the time was not right, and the mood was not right, and she did not know anyone there, and going alone to a place like that had a quality of statement she was not prepared to make. She had been telling herself these things for 4 months. She knew what they were. She took the long way down from Montmartre, through the streets she had learned over 7 years, the particular intimate geography of the neighborhood she had made hers, the bakery on the corner that started at 5 in the morning, the tobacconist who read the newspaper in the doorway, the alley behind the church where Margot's cat conducted its private business with the indifference of one who owned everything it surveyed. She walked through it with the letters in her inside pocket, and Isabelle's last sentence running alongside her thoughts. The least I can do is go dancing. The light was the late afternoon gold she had read Isabelle's letter in. By the time she reached the river it had gone to the particular blue of early March evening, the city doing its slow pivot toward night. She crossed the Pont Saint-Michel, and the Seine was low and gray below her, and she walked without stopping, which was the thing she needed. To be moving, to be in the body, to be the woman who had just read 11 years of patient certainty, and was walking towards something rather than away from it. She found the door. It was, as she had been told, unmarked, set into the wall of a building off the Rue de la Harpe, announced only by the quality of attention the street gave to its corner. She had an eye for these doors. She had, she supposed, been trained to have an eye for them. She paid the cover charge to a woman in a good suit who looked at her with the mild approval of a door person who recognized the type and was glad to see it.
She went in.
The room was below street level, the ceiling low and vaulted, the light warm and particular. A 5-piece was playing something slow and modern, the trumpet making the conversation it always made at this register, intimate and unhurried. The room was full. Perhaps 30 people, the company the woman at table 6 had meant when she said the right kind, the specific gathering of a city's margin and its secret and its chosen. Dell stood at the entrance and let her eyes adjust and felt the room read her and read the room back. She knew no one here. This was its own relief. She found the bar and ordered something she did not choose carefully. accepted the glass the barman poured without specification, which was a small surrender in a life of careful selections, and felt, for that reason, precisely right. She stood at the edge of the floor. The trumpet continued its conversation. A couple near the far wall were dancing the way people danced in rooms like this. Not performing, not displaying, but simply moving together in the particular privacy that a crowded room offered when everyone in it had agreed to mind their own business. The woman on the piano was playing with the specific pleasure of someone who was inside the music rather than presenting it to an audience. Dell stood at the edge of the floor for 7 minutes and 43 seconds, by her own count. She was aware of herself standing there. She was aware of the quality of her standing, the careful posture, the professional bearing, the default to the periphery. That was so deeply habitual, she would not have noticed it if Isabelle had not described it back to her. Careful, like someone who learned young that being seen costs something. She was aware of the 2 glasses of wine she had not had, because she had walked here on water and the letter and the March evening, and she was aware that she did not need the wine, and that the awareness of not needing it was itself a kind of information. She thought about Isabelle writing, "I want you to go dancing. Not for me, for you." She thought about the Thursday evening in January, sitting at the corner table, with the wanting intact and the management set aside. Isabelle saying, "That's not what I asked," with the patient precision of someone who had been waiting for the question to become a fact. She thought, "The question has become a fact. The wall is down. The letter is in my pocket, and the seal on my wrist is simply skin." She walked to the center of the floor. She did not do it carefully. She did not take stock of who was watching. She did not find the position she was most comfortable in. She did not enter the floor as the woman who ran a room. Competent, warm at a measured distance, the professional warmth that had been her primary armor for 7 years. She walked to the center of the floor, and she was simply Dell Beaumont, 32 years old, who had come from Chicago with $40 and a borrowed tuxedo and a private knowledge she had been building a life over for 13 years, and who was done building a life over it. A woman near the edge of the floor caught her eye. Not a question, a simple acknowledgement, the kind that passed between people in a room like this, the language of mutual recognition that did not require explanation. Dell received it. She nodded. The woman moved toward her, and they danced. Not carefully. Not alone. She let herself be seen. It was not easy. She would not pretend, even in the interior account she was keeping, that it was easy. The habit of management was not erased by a single March evening, did not dissolve because she had named it and put the letters in her pocket and walked across a bridge. She felt it the whole time she was on the floor. The pull toward the peripheral, the instinct to modulate what she was showing, the long-trained reflex of a woman who had learned young that being visible was the precondition of being a target. She felt it, and she stayed in the center of the floor anyway, because staying in the center of the floor anyway was the thing Isabelle had spent 31 years waiting for her to do.
She danced.
The trumpet moved through its conversation. The piano resolved a phrase and began another. The room was warm with the specific warmth of people who had come here to be what they were and were being it, and Dell moved in it and felt the warmth and let it be what it was without explaining it away. She thought about Isabelle, not with grief. Not exactly, not only. She thought about Isabelle the way you thought about someone you loved who is not here to be with you, but whose presence you carried in the specific way of a person who has been loved carefully across a distance and knows it. She thought about the corner table and the gray-green eyes and the sentences that arrived one beat after she expected them. She thought about the particular composure of a woman who had survived the worst thing and had come through it still entirely herself. She thought, "I am carrying her into a room she never got to be in." She thought, "This is what the inheritance was for." She danced for a long time. The woman who had noticed her from the edge of the floor was a good dancer, easy and present, uncomplicated in the way of someone who came here often and had no agenda except the music and the company. She did not ask Dell questions. They danced the way people danced when the talking was not the point. When the trumpet finally resolved its long conversation into something that felt like an ending, Dell thanked her. The woman smiled. A real smile, uncomplicated and warm, and Dell received it without deflecting, without refilling a glass, without changing the subject. She walked back to Montmartre, in the March dark. The city was doing its night thing around her. The late workers, the couples, the solitary figures who belonged to the night's economy. She walked through it with the letters in her jacket, and the warmth of the room still in her chest, and the March cold on her face, and the particular feeling of a woman who had set something down that she had been carrying for a very long time. Not loss. Not grief. Completion. Isabelle had written. Dell walked home through the city that had given her the language for what she was, and the life she had built on top of the wanting was behind her, and the life that had room in it was ahead, and the night received her without comment, the way it always did, the way Paris always had, as something it already knew was coming. She did not go back to the club that night. She went upstairs. She did not sleep for some time, but it was a different kind of wakefulness. Not the wakefulness of something unresolved, but the wakefulness of someone who has arrived somewhere after a long journey and is still feeling the motion of traveling in their body, still adjusting to the fact of being still. She lay in the dark and held the feeling. She did not explain it away. Chapter 22. Every closing time. Summer came to Paris the way it always did. Not all at once, but by accumulation, the warmth becoming the air rather than simply being in it. By June, the chestnut trees on the boulevards were full and green, and the light stayed until 9 o'clock, and the city moved at a different pace, slower and more expansive, the particular ease of a place that understood what warmth was for. Dell did not substantially change her schedule. The club ran its 4 nights. Clem played. The regulars came. The kitchen turned out the things it turned out, and the champagne moved, and the till closed with numbers she could be satisfied with. She had done this for 4 years, and she intended to do it for more, and the sameness of it was not, she had come to understand, the sameness of a life that had stopped moving. It was the sameness of a foundation, the stable thing under the parts that changed. The parts that changed were not nothing. She had gone to Ruthie's gallery opening in March, on the Thursday after she read the letters.
She had stayed until the end.
She had accepted a glass of something read from a woman whose name she had not immediately asked for, and had talked to her for 20 minutes about the paintings, which were interesting, and had laughed at something the woman said with the private laugh rather than the professional one, which the woman had noticed and had treated with the care it deserved. She had not gone home with her. That was not the point. The point was that she had been present in the room, fully and without the layers of management, and the room had not collapsed as a consequence. She had been seen, and the world had continued on its established axis. She wrote to Vera in April. Not the honest letter from February. She was not yet sure what to do with that letter, which sat in a drawer in the kitchen, and was either the truest thing she had ever written or the beginning of a longer conversation or both, and she was not ready to decide. She wrote a different letter, shorter and more careful than the February one, which said, "I want to tell you something true. I am well. I have been more well in the last several months than I was before. I think the city finally got all the way in. I think I have been letting it." She paused over that sentence for a long time before leaving it. She sent the letter. She did not explain further. She thought that Vera, who was a perceptive woman, would understand more of it than it said. She went to Henri for coffee in May. He looked better. The word that had always come to her mind when she thought of Henri was caring, the look of a man carrying something heavy with the intention of carrying it indefinitely, and that quality had shifted. He looked lighter in the specific way that people looked lighter when they had put down something they had been holding for too long. They talked about Isabelle. Not the excavating conversations of winter, not the careful delivery of grief and history, but something more comfortable, the conversations of people who shared a person they both loved and had arrived at the place where the loving was no longer weighted by the loss of it. He had brought a photograph, black and white, taken somewhere in 1916 or 1917, Isabelle in an archival reading room at a table covered with papers, her head turned slightly toward the camera as though she had been caught in the middle of a thought and was mildly amused about it. The expression on her face was entirely recognizable. Dell held it for a long time. She gave it back. Henri shook his head. "Keep it," he said, in the careful English that had become, over the months, less careful as he trusted her more with the weight he was translating into it. "She would want you to have it." Dell put the photograph on the bar of the club, at the end nearest the corner table, where the light was good at closing time. She did not see Isabelle again after that March afternoon. She had known she would not. Completion was the word, and completion was what had happened. She felt it in the seal on her wrist, which was simply skin now, simply hers, the way a scar became texture and stopped being an event. She felt it in the room, which had a different quality in the evenings, not less, not diminished, but different in the way that a room felt when something that had been tended and held in readiness had been received, and the tending was complete. She did not explain it away. She sat with it. In June, at a party at Ruthie's apartment that she had been persuaded to attend by an argument so sustained and comprehensive that resistance would have been more effort than going, she danced again. Not the concentrated intention of the left bank in March. This was Ruthie's living room. Etienne on the piano, a dozen people she mostly knew, the easy dancing of people who had eaten well and were glad to be in a room together. She danced with Ruthie, who was a terrible dancer in the specific way of a woman who had no interest in being otherwise. She danced with a friend of Ruthie's, a sculptor from Senegal who had been in Paris for 2 years and had strong opinions about the city's bridges. She danced with her hands above her head in the way she had not danced since she was 17 years old in a kitchen in Chicago, where no one was watching. People were watching. She did not care. "You look different," Ruthie said afterward, on the balcony with 2 glasses of something cold, the June night warm and particular around them. "I feel different," Dell said. "Good different." Dell thought about this. She thought about the honest letter in the kitchen drawer, and the photograph on the bar, and the seal on her wrist that was simply skin. She thought about the March evening and the dance floor, and the trumpet's long conversation, and the specific feeling of a woman who had set down something she had been carrying for 13 years, and discovered that her arms still worked. "Good different," she said. Ruthie looked at her with the expression she reserved for moments she was deciding to simply receive rather than comment on. She received it. She drank her wine. "I'm glad," she said. And then, because she was Ruthie and silence was something that happened to other people, she would be glad too. "I know," Dell said. The summer moved around them. Paris at its longest days, the light lasting and generous, the city leaning into the warmth with the relief of something that had been patient through a long cold and had finally been given what it was waiting for. On a Friday in July, late in the evening, a man who had come in with a party of 6 and had been drinking the good champagne and enjoying himself in the straightforward way of a man having a genuinely good time, stopped Dell at the bar to compliment the club. Where had she found such a place, he wanted to know. How had she come to be here? "It was left to me," Dell said. He found this interesting. "By whom?" Dell looked at the photograph at the end of the bar. The reading room, the papers, the head turned slightly toward the camera, the expression of someone caught in the middle of a thought, mildly amused about it. "A woman," she said, "who knew me before she knew me. We just took a while to meet." He found this charming and enigmatic in equal measure, which was the appropriate response. He ordered another bottle and returned to his party, and Dell stood at the bar for a moment, her hand resting near the photograph, and felt the room around her the way she had come to feel it over the months, as something whole, something that held more than its dimensions contained. The evening continued. The kitchen sent out its last plates. Clem played through the late register with the particular tenderness of someone who understood that the music now was for the room itself as much as the people in it. The regulars settled in for the long end of the night, the good comfortable end, the part where the performance had finished and the real conversations began. Dell moved through it all with the easy authority she had always had in this room, the quiet choreography of the closing ritual, the small adjustments, the refilled glasses, the conversation she rerouted, and the one she started. She knew this room. She had made it and she had been made by it, and now she was simply in it, which was the best way to be anywhere. At midnight, the last of the guests went home. Clem played the final phrase of the slow piece, the one that had taken months to finish and had finished itself, as it turned out, without requiring a decision, simply by arriving at the place it was going. They played it to the end. They sat for a moment with their hands still. "Good night, Clem," Dell said. "Good night," Clem said. A pause at the door. The pause they sometimes gave her, the one that held what it held without requiring words. "Good summer." "Good summer," Dell said. They left. She did the closing operations. She had done them so many times they were memory in her body rather than thought. The glasses, the chairs, the till, the kitchen, the particular sequence that returned the room to its neutral state. She did them with the attention she had always brought to them, the attention that found the repetition meaningful rather than tedious, that understood the value of the ritual in its own right. She turned off the last lamp. She crossed the room in the dark. She knew it by memory, had always known it by memory, bar and tables and chairs and the stairs to the cellar and the door to the kitchen, and she sat down at the corner table. The summer dark outside made the room less dark than winter evenings. The light from the street came through the high windows in a thin warm band, and the city's ambient glow gave the room a quality that the November evenings had not had. She could see the chairs, the bar, the photograph at the end nearest her. She could see the room clearly. She sat at the corner table. She sat in it the way she had learned to sit in it, not occupying the room but being in it, not managing the quiet but receiving it, not explaining away what she felt but simply feeling it. The warmth that was not a presence, exactly, not a ghost, not the specific temperature shift she had spent 3 months of Tuesdays learning to recognize. Something more like the particular warmth of being thought of by someone who loved you carefully across a distance you couldn't cross for longer than either of you knew. She sat with it. She did not explain it away. She thought about the first evening, November, the last couple at the door, Clem at the piano, the room in its closing time state. The woman she had been then, competent, warm at a measured distance, privately starving, standing in the dark for a moment longer than she needed to, for a reason she hadn't examined, then going upstairs alone, exactly as planned.
She was not that woman now.
She was not a different woman, not replaced, not revised, not a before and after. She was the same woman who had walked across the Atlantic with $40 and a borrowed tuxedo and a private knowledge, the same woman who had wiped the mahogany bar because it was the thing she was most certain of, the same woman who had stood at the church on the roof rocket and looked at the carved mark above the door and walked away as deliberately as she could. The same woman.
With room in her now.
Room she had made by setting down what she had been carrying. Room that had always been there under the architecture of not wanting, waiting for the architecture to come down. Outside, Paris was in its summer dark. The street was quiet for a Friday, the late hour, the city's rhythm at the season, the particular quiet that followed a room full of people. She could hear, faintly, the distant piano from somewhere on the Rue Lepic, someone practicing at an unreasonable hour with the committed selfishness of a musician who needed to play more than the neighborhood needed to sleep. She sat at the corner table and held the warmth. That was enough, she thought. She thought that was, it turns out, more than enough. She looked at the room. Her room, Isabelle's room, the room that had been built by someone who loved her before they knew her, who had salted the walls with the feeling of the late hour and the empty glasses and the kind of honesty that only lived after midnight. And she was grateful. Not in the formal, managed way she was grateful for useful things. Grateful in the way of someone who had received something they did not know they needed and had been changed by the receiving. She let the room be what it was. She sat with it for a long time. Then she rose and straightened the chair and walked to the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs she paused and looked back at the room one more time. The tables in their neat arrangement, the bar with the photograph at its end, the corner table with its 2 chairs and its candlestick, the high windows with their narrow band of summer light. She blew out the last candle. The room held the warmth for a moment longer. Then she went upstairs. To her life, which had room in it now. For wanting things.
And